Hello and welcome to Fiddler's Green podcast number 49, Just Ordinary Men. So as everyone has constantly reminded me on Twitter, this has been the first podcast in quite some time. I think the last one I did was, it's kind of amazing, it was almost 2 months ago. Usually I want these things to be every other week. For a while I had them every week and that was too much to keep up with along with the writing. And just a confession right now, my life has been getting very crazy. I'm probably in the middle of a move. There are a variety of unfortunate situations going on in my extended family that I need to be aware of, and it's kind of been draining to my energy overall. And just generally work has kind of taken a toll, and at the end of the day, I decided it would be easier to keep the Substack going and put this off a little bit. There also have been several events that took up some of my time, at least when it came to preparing speeches. Those of you who were good enough to come out to the New Jersey Basket Weavers Banquet that took place in mid-April, I'm very, very grateful for that. It was a great event, I thought. Nice little cozy atmosphere and dinner. And then more recently, just this last weekend, I got back from the Old Glory Club conference in Tennessee, which is, I don't exactly know how to count it, because there was essentially a summer conference going on in Tennessee for the last 3 years, but this is the first one that's owned entirely by the Old Glory Club. So I guess we're calling it the first Old Glory Club conference, and I just got back from that, and you know, I told myself, okay, I'll really just kick this podcast up after we finish up these events. And another thing that I think was kind of difficult about doing these podcasts was just the state of affairs in terms of world events and in terms of how I want to talk about things. Discourse online is always a big deal, and it's always a lot of what I talk about. And I have to confess, despite the fact that I haven't done many podcasts, and I have kept up with the blog, but still it's been a little bit lighter than I'd like it to be. I have spent probably an inordinate amount of time on Twitter because just how many changes there have been going on recently in the news, and how kind of the dynamic and vibe shift has been changing over the last few months. And I kind of wanted to use that as a basis of this conversation in this podcast tonight, is to kind of review what's going on in terms of the culture overall, the political dynamic, and how it's playing out on Twitter. That's usually my frame of reference, even though I'm perfectly capable of having political conversations in real life. And I unfortunately have more political conversations in real life than I really ought to. You can kind of feel things have changed. I mean, the first thing that's very apparent is that there's no election this year. There is no election this year. This should be the most important election of our lifetimes, as they say, of every election in my entire life. But this is the first time I've consumed media, and no one with a straight face has told me yet that this is the most important election of my life. It's actually unique. The unique thing about this election is that no one's telling me it's very important, because no one can believe it's very important. No one is talking about issues. No one is even pretending to talk about issues. In 2016, we damn well pretended to talk about issues. We really pretended like we cared about Social Security, or the border the administration of the American border, or just immigration generally, or how to structure entitlements, or foreign affairs. No one believes that anymore. And in 2020, they put on a show because there was COVID going on. And, you know, there was already this performance around wearing masks and social distancing around a disease where the transmissibility wasn't really affected by either of those things so much, other than just locking people down generally. And so I guess what was one more performance on the heap of vanities? What's one more false pretense? And of course, with the false pretense that we were actually debating things, we were actually going through some kind of discourse that would decide the next president. And what happened? An election that no one really believed was an election. I obviously, if you're a Democrat or you're a progressive of the moderate or radical variety, you believe that, and of course I would certainly believe also that the 2020 election was the most free and fair election of any election that has ever occurred on the face of this planet. But you don't really believed that it was an election as such. There wasn't a decision. The removal of Trump was a procedural function of the government to clear away corruption. It wasn't actually like there were two ideas coming to the podium and one was defeated. The only thing that was decided was that Trump was a criminal of some variety. We knew he was a criminal before we even charged him. And now that what happened was just sort of the wheels of justice kicking into gear. That was the only product of the 2020 election, not any kind of conversation. So that such that even after the 2008 and 2012 election, the refocus always was on to the issues and the legislation that would be going through the new administration. Usually there were debates about what they could do in Congress in their first 100 days. That doesn't really occur anymore. What happened with Biden, most notably, were just sort of decisions handed down by the administrative state to kind of tighten the screws on various places where they were leaking power. And so, everyone can see this. Whether you believe it, there was a disagreement about whether we believe it's legitimate. There's a disagreement about whether we believe that it is healthy for the country or anything else like that. But there's not going to be there's no kind of understanding that this is a part of an ordinary electoral process through which the population has participated or communicated some kind of mandate. And so we're just in kind of this bonkers area of discourse. And this is also kind of followed up by a variety of happenings online when it came to various factions on the right, which I'll talk about currently. And as I want to do, maybe I should go into the presentation mode right now so we can get on with the podcast right now. As I was kind of looking at these scenarios, as I was kind of examining how politics has changed, and not has it really changed in the last 2 months, not entirely, but just kind of how everything has. How the various camps were aligning themselves. I'm aware of discourses that are going on, varieties of discourses, communities of people. If you were to log on to my Twitter, and I mute almost everybody, but sometimes I click on the For You tab or I just watch some normie feeds and see what people are retweeting. Twitter is one of those things where if you can follow a few good aggregators and not mute them, then you get a fairly good understanding of what all the sides are doing. And I noticed that there are kind of four main circles of discourse. There was Normie Land that I have circled here in blue. And Normie Land was almost entirely concerned about whether they could prosecute Trump and the ultimate consequences of prosecuting Trump, which is, I'm not going to relitigate this, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. I'm not going to relitigate the trial of Trump, but the problem is I do listen to a variety of kind of centrist Democrat podcasts every now and again that kind of pop on to like the Know Your Enemy. Anyone ever watch that? The Know Your Enemy podcast? It's a bunch of these insufferable shit libs that talk about Republicans like they're some kind of radical scourge from mid-century Germany, and they're coming up with countermeasures. It's basically like they're LARPing the resistance, like this was 2019. But they have this kind of very NPR sort of adults are in the room, the grown-ups are speaking. These are the responsible academics, and half of them have PhDs, which is just what an insufferable thing. And I say that as someone who has a PhD. And so I'm kind of taking their pulse, and they're of course overjoyed that Trump has been indicted, but there's no understanding of the crime, and they all secretly know that this is bullshit. They know that these charges are clumped together. They're essentially the CD. Is my volume? Someone's saying my volume's not high enough. Is this better? Maybe I can put it up a little bit. I always hate having interruptions. Testing. Okay, I'll just put this up all the way, I guess. I'll hold it closer to my face like this. Is this better? At any rate, I'm holding the microphone in one hand. This usually works a lot better with this microphone anyway. If there's still volume issues, just let me know. But what's so funny is what's so funny about the normie podcasts I listen to when I examine them, or when I kind of check in on them, is just how they approach this. They approach this like a giant cope. They look at the indictments brought against Trump, and they say, well, we all agree that he did something bad. We all agree that he did harm to this country. They never talk about the specific indictments. They never talk about the precedents they set. They never talk about any of the smaller things, or not any of the more, I should say, focused things about the legislation. When, for instance, Bill Clinton was going through his whole sexual harassment suits and the perjury suits, the focus was entirely on the nature of perjury and the nature of the crimes themselves. This was just an indictment. Every time I hear shitlibs or moderates talk about the indictment of Trump, it always just filters out to the most general, oh, he was a bad guy. We all agree he was a bad guy. He was a bad guy. He deserved this, because they understand at some level that this crosses a line, that this essentially is going to kick off a new era of American politics. And then they have this gigantic like therapy session amongst themselves, convincing themselves that this is sort of a legitimate procedural development of modern America, that they're embodying. Just their hands were tied. They had to support the prosecution of Trump. They couldn't do any other, because this was their duty as good Republican citizens to support the trial and conviction of the major opposition party leader under very, very suspicious circumstances. They just had to do this, and they'll spend an hour or 2 hours just talking themselves into this in the most ridiculous way imaginable. Then I kind of shift my gears a little bit, and I go over to sort of the more normie Republican side, and there's another conversation going on, and this is, I guess, perhaps the most productive conversation as far as we're concerned in the dissident sphere, over sort of the fate of evangelical power politics. Now, this is something that I was very, very interested in during, I think, the first part of this year, the last part of the previous, the sort of conversations around liberalism and Christian nationalism inside the Christian world, inside the evangelical world. And, this is something I really dislike, because I consider myself a non-nationalist. I like to think that I'm pursuing a older political form than nationalism, and I see nationalism as an extension of sort of a very specific form of secular 19th century ideology. And also what Christian nationalism does, and I think Stephen Wolfe follows me, and I certainly enjoy reading some of his tweets or hearing him speak on podcasts. It does the thing that conservatives do all the time, that's just I can never get over. They take normal, and then they put a label on normal so that they can sell a movement, so they can turn normal into a movement. Normal into a movement does not work. It doesn't work for a variety of reasons, because it creates this kind of weird discourse. And I touched on this a little bit in my talk at the OGC conference. It creates this weird fake discourse where you're trying to argue people into sanity, where you're trying to argue people into not doing the most bizarre and insane and self-destructive thing of all time. And so the framing is terrible. But the ideas that Stephen Wolfe and his allies promote on Christian nationalism, or the ideas that R.N. McIntyre promotes in this sphere that are decidedly not called Christian nationalism by him, these are somehow incredibly controversial among sort of modern evangelical leaders. This is what Kruptos called regime evangelicals, which I thought was, I don't think Kruptos came up with that term. I think someone else in his chat used that title, but that's just brilliant. Regime Christians. And it's bizarre, because you have to wade through just this absolute, complete, this absolute complete historical incoherence. Another person in this circle that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is Jeremy Wade for the Wade Show. He does these little 5-minute clips where it's essentially rephrasing dissident ideas or right-wing ideas in digestible form with some light humor mixed in, and in perfect kind of Twitch fashion. And he does a brilliant job at communicating these messages. I am 100% not his audience, so I don't always watch them. I sometimes send them to people, and my wife watches them, and they're really good. But he'll do something. For instance, he'll make a video about why the Constitution is dead. And this is a sort of a rehash of Joseph de Maistre, and this is something we've been talking for since I don't know how long. I did a video on this in 2018, along with reading the de Maistre piece on constitutions. I made a little audiobook of that, and I uploaded it on an alternative channel, and I think you can still find it if you want to hear me reading Joseph de Maistre. And so, we have been talking about this forever, and the core of the argument is that when constitutions only have validity insofar as you believe in them. If your government does not follow the Constitution, then the Constitution is literally a dead letter. And I'm not even using literally improperly. It is literally a dead letter in as many ways as literally can legitimately mean, both meaning very and also literally as in actually a dead letter. It's the definition of what dead letter means. But this sort of innocuous idea that's been kicking around in sort of the properly dissident spheres for 4 years now, it created this furor among sort of the normie conservatives, and like, oh no, we have to save the Constitution, we have to push back. How could you say this? And the problem is that there's no dialogue. You get a few reactions. A few reactions is to kind of I forget who did this. One evangelical, I think he was a conservative. He made this case. I'm very famous, like Eric Erickson. I think he had this whole rant about how we needed to stick by limited government because it was a core principle, even though we haven't had limited government or a constitution that could limit government for, I don't know, since the end of the Civil War, but certainly since the end of the New Deal. So this idea that like you're going to be the limited government people in a polity that does not practice limited government is nuts. But this is the boomer MO. It's just, we need to reassert it and fight harder. We need the Constitution harder. But what was interesting is actually, Eric Erickson was kind of cringe in his own right. But what was interesting was the reaction from these evangelical leaders was this this kind of strange confusion of civic duty with religious duty. And you had one pastor, one thinker who was saying that, okay, since Peter accepted the authority of Nero, and obviously Peter was martyred by Nero, so and he was martyred because he broke Nero's laws. So, despite the fact that he acknowledged Nero as the legitimate government of the Roman Empire, exactly how much do you accept a government that you die to flout their core regulations in the heart of their capital? But the argument was that because St. Peter accepted Nero, that means all Christians have an obligation to essentially endorse the government of the country where they exist, and to shut up and don't rock the boat. Shut up and don't rock the boat. And it's bizarre. I mean, the reason why it's so bizarre is, okay, so there is a case for Christian quietism in politics, 100%. There is an absolute case that most Christians, and in fact this is true just generally, most people should not be involved in their day-to-day lives with politics. This is one of the ideas that's commonly put forward by the right, and it's absolutely true. But the issue with this, he then goes on after telling us why Peter was right not to oppose Nero. Again, Peter did oppose Nero, but provided he had some kind of peace with the Roman government as it was, insofar as that they wanted to pursue order. After saying that, then this guy goes on and says, oh, well, the founding fathers were heroes for fighting against King George. And you get this bizarre kind of thing. Okay, well, so you're right to accept Nero, while he is murdering Christians. You're wrong to accept King George when he puts, a 5-cent tax on your tea. That doesn't make any sense. And what emerges out of this is this bizarre fixation on the Constitution and the forms of the previous American government as some kind of quasi-religious document. And it goes without saying that there is no dialogue in this. The Christian nationalists and the people who are kind of the properly right-wing Christians are bringing actual arguments to this sphere. And what happens in reaction to it is just like this kind of weird cope, this weird desire to muddy the waters, to confuse the conversation, to try to indict the people who support these post-liberal ideas as being bad mid-century Germans, and to try to do a sleight of hand so that they can confuse the Constitution with Holy Scripture without actually saying the Constitution is the equivalent of Holy Scripture, which they all know to be bullshit. And then there's two other spheres. I'll deal with these kind of more generally when later in the slides. The one that I've kind of been the most aware of is what's been going on in Substack, and this is where I think a lot of the intellectual force, pretty much everyone who writes articles now who is not literally employed by the mainstream media at a publication that owns what they write, is putting their stuff on Substack. So to get a good feeling of where the intellectual conversation is going, that's always where I go. And it's really easy to see what's dominating Substack right now. What's dominating Substack, the main mood that's dominating Substack is whether you are conservative or reactionary, well, not really reactionary, whether you're conservative or right-wing or liberal, or even some leftists, the reaction is, holy shit, we totally got out from society totally went nuts in 2020 to 2022. We need to find some way to pull this back and make sure that everything does not just fall into a heap, and figure out some way that we can have a more sane conversation about things like crime, like how we manage the economy, like how we manage wars, like how we talk about, transgenderism, which, as we're seeing in Europe, is currently unraveling. And everyone kind of knows that some other shoe is going to eventually drop when it comes to these ideas that the regime went all in on. And so the consensus is, whether you're coming from the right and trying to appeal to the left, or whether you are coming from the left and trying to cover your ass, is to kind of, I think we can contrive some moderate position, some technocratic solution to fix the whole thing. Matt Iglesias was on this. Richard Hanani was on this. My personal favorite, Freddie DeBoer, almost every other day he writes an article about how progressives progressives went insane in 2020, and now we all have to forget it. We all have to forget that they essentially triggered a mini crime wave that burnt down many American cities. We all have to forget they massively lied about certain qualities of the transmissibility of COVID. We all have to forget about how they censored media and gated all stories that were detrimental to Biden, and then other shenanigans that fortified the 2020 election went on. These are all things that we know from various sources at this, from the Twitter files, from admissions made by our government, and I guess with the transgenderism thing, with admissions that are now being made by European governments, because their medical systems are not invested in essentially driving up the cost of medical procedures. And so now they have the problem of trying to tamp down on transgenderism because it's an unnecessary cost, and move back into a position where they can actually try to encourage people to live more healthy lives, because it's very, very obvious that transitioning children is insane. And then finally, you've got the leftists, and the leftists are kind of the weirdest bunch, because at this stage they're almost entirely isolated. Almost every leftist, all they do is read the news to their audience, which usually almost all of them are on Twitch, and then every now and again, when the Daily Wire or someone associated with the Daily Wire does something stupid, they make fun of them. And there are debates, and I had the misfortune of doing one, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, with this guy, Actual Jake, who used to be part of this atheist duo called Hugo and Jake, I think. that did stuff like they read the Bible and made fun of it, like this cringe new atheist shit. And of course, one of them transitioned, and then they fell out. And now what this Jake guy does, he dresses up like a corn cob and goes and has his incredibly bad faith debates with various right wingers. No, I'd seen his debate with John Doyle, who I had the pleasure of meeting just 5 days ago. A very nice guy, very promising young Zoomer conservative, paleocon, I would call him. That's the best way to describe it. And back in 2019, and during the ascendancy of modern day debates, just before COVID, there was an actual back and forth debate. It wasn't particularly good. I would say that the Jake guy lost. But what I wasn't expecting was just this absolute like clown show. I mean, it was literally a clown show. The guy never talked to me. He talked to his chat and then just insulted and cut me off until eventually he just started insulting my family like randomly. And I had to just quit. Because I mean, like, you can't. What am I supposed to do? Like, sit there? Like, I can smile when he calls me a Nazi for the 47th time, but you can't sit there. A man can't just sit there and listen to a living corn cob insult his wife and kid and just smile along. And then of course, you have to hang up. And then what does he do after he gets off? Oh my God, I owned him. He ran away. Yeah, I ran away because all you were doing is spurging out in a corn costume, insulting family members and ignoring arguments. But I mean, the entire left sphere that was in basically a 2020 promising revolution, it's in this hermetically sealed bubble. They're literally just sealed off from the outside world. They communicate with each other. Mostly they fight with each other. And then they read the news to people on their chat and do like little mini Daily Show routines. There's no engaging with policy. There's no engaging with political organization because, of course, Bernie's no longer on the scene and probably will never be. I think he'll be dead by the time there's another election where he could conceivably run. And even then, obviously, he won't win. And they're just, by all logic, this group should be winning. By all logic, this group should be winning. Society at all levels has endorsed their presuppositions. Their moral presuppositions have been endorsed by society. I don't even need to tell anyone in the chat this. You just go outside. It's June. It's the gay month. It's Pride. You go outside and the entire city is decked out in rainbows. Everyone's teaching this in schools. It's in all our HR presentations. Is it cool among the intellectual class? Well, not so much anymore. A lot of them are kind of getting really tired of it. They're tired of kowtowing to absolute lunatics. They're tired of having to pretend that black is white and that men are women and that truth is and that war is peace and all the rest. And they're kind of withdrawn. They're kind of backing off slowly. But in public, the radical left should be absolutely ascendant because they control the ideas space. They have all of the young people, and all they're doing is kind of turning it into a giant entertainment product and a giant grift. There's no desire to actually kind of reach outside. This gets me to the question. We've been talking about the vibe shift. I talked about this in my last Fiddler's Green podcast, and I hope my volume levels are good, by the way. You'll just have to tell me in the chat whether they are or they not. The vibe shift has been something we've been talking about for a year or two, and it pretty much has reached its completion at this stage. And I'll go over this in detail. You could kind of sense that something was on the verge of changing in 2023. I think the worm has actually turned, and we're in kind of a mode that will be stable for a little while. But let's review exactly what's happened. I mean, ultimately, all of these four things are essentially an extension of the same thing. They're all reacting to this vibe shift that occurred. And what vibe shift occurred? Well, I mean, this gets to the point of I'll just skip ahead here. This gets to the point of the dissident right. The vibe shift that we experienced in 2021 and 2022 was essentially just a variety of observations about the nature of politics and humanity that were put forward by the right and which were later vindicated. They were later vindicated in one way, shape, or form. And And now, and what the vibe shift represents really in 2022 and 2023 is everyone kind of coming to terms and mostly coping with the fact that these ideas, mostly observations about politics that were put forward by the dissident right, were vindicated and are not going away. And how are they going to react to that? This gets me into like this word, the dissident right. What is the dissident right? Well, the dissident right is absolutely nothing. All it was a certain group of people that rejected classical neoconservative or fusionist conservatism of the National Review variety. Basically, it's all people who rejected normie conservatives who were vaguely on the right. I have hated this word, even though I'm one of the people that's most closely associated with it in my work. And the reason why I hated it is because people treat it like it's an actual thing. And so every time people have a problem with one element or another on the right, they always go into tirades over the dissident right. Oh my God, the dissident right has totally jumped the shark. They've lost the plot. I've literally witnessed a debate between two factions on the dissident right, essentially non-normie Republican right-wingers. I've witnessed a multi-month debate between two factions of the right wing on Twitter where they were both calling each other dissident right and explaining how the dissident right is so over. It's a punching bag when really all it represents is a certain negation, a certain absence of ideas, or conversely, you could say it represents a certain set of observations. And it's not really a move. The dissident right is absolutely not a movement, but it is a set of ideas that, again, over the course of 3 years have become kind of obvious. And so while there's nothing that you can really point to and blame for these ideas, and while everyone wants to write an article about how neo-reaction is over or the dissident right is over and it's time to get on to something new, they become cringe, they become completely out of ideas, but there's no ideas. Well, I mean, again, I'm going to go over the ideas. The ideas are simply negation of Enlightenment ideas. The dissident right brought forward a certain number of observations that would be absolutely positively uncontroversial for anyone living before the 1800s. Like Julius Evola said, these concepts would be completely unoffensive and would have been believed by all well-thinking people before the French Revolution. And there is no reason to believe that they're not true. And the problem is that almost all of these concepts go directly against elements of our own contemporary liberal order. So while they feel like they are something, these feel like they're ideas, they're new ideas brought forward by a movement called the dissident right. All they are is just noticing things. They're just noticing reality and go, hey, maybe we should do something about this. Hey, maybe the pillars that we've built our modern society on are crumbling beneath our feet. And you need to have an answer for them. You need to have some kind of reaction. I'll go over them briefly. I enumerated them here in no particular order, and I'm sure there's a way that you could kind of sum this up more succinctly. But I kind of wanted to take a whack at each of them, because I think each of these should be pretty easy to see. And you can see them in the struggles of the various groups that we've discussed. First, moral systems. Moral systems are fundamentally religious and spiritual. There's no universal morality. There's an anthropologically common morality that we could call something like natural law. But so for instance, almost all human societies have considered homosexuality or public homosexuality an anathema, or at least all post-agricultural societies. There are some hunter and gatherers where I'm told that this is not the case. Oh, even then it's highly misinterpreted by modern anthropologists to fit into a political framework. But moral systems cannot be proven. They don't extend from rationality. They're not part and parcel of some kind of greater appeal to human common sense or an esoteric philosophy that's been with us since the beginning of time. They are fundamentally assertions that exist in a spiritual or religious mode. They're deeply connected to humans' religious instinct and its understanding of meaning. And they are also not independently, intersubjectively verifiable, although they have some anthropological commonality. So right away, the modernist project to come up with universal secular morality, not going to work. Or if it does work, it will be accomplished by creating a new religion that we just incorrectly label secular because it's the one that we want to rule our society. Extending from this, discourse without moral alignment or deference is impossible. This should be pretty apparent from anyone who's witnessed how America and the West react to attempts to have reasonable discourse in any way, shape, or form. Everyone is political these days. People are more political than they've ever been, and they've gotten more political from 2012 to 2022. And in the same time where everyone's gotten political, our ability to sit down and have a conversation about politics has universally collapsed. That's because there is no point in having discourse with people where you do not agree on some substantive basis for alignment and deference. And by deference, I mean there's a moral boundary, and I'm not going to cross that moral boundary. I mean, take, for instance, my conversation with Mr. Cornman. My moral boundary is don't insult my family. I mean, we're even way past the whole no ad hominems. I mean, you can't have a productive conversation if your opponent is refusing to engage with you on any points and just calling you names. But I mean, I'll put up with it as long as it doesn't go overboard and come out to like threats against my people who are directly in my ward. I mean, that's pretty bare bones, right? But we can't even get to that point anymore. We're getting to the point where don't call my son a dirty name is that's hard for leftists to grapple with. That moral proposition, it's a struggle to get that at this stage. And so discourse has collapsed, and that's because there's no common agreement about moral boundaries. There's no common agreement about what's a legitimate point of conversation where you actually stop your rhetoric and stop your entertainment and actually stand down. And because of that, there can be no legal regulation either. This is crazy, but I mean, you can see this. I mean, I don't think anyone, if this were any other age, if this were the 1990s, virtually all news organizations would be hosting debates about whether the charges brought against Donald Trump were legitimate or not. This conversation, I don't know. I feel like I've watched my fair share of normie news, or at least when I briefly visited my parents, I did, and nobody is having. I mean, maybe they have like a debate with people who are already agree that Donald Trump is guilty, and the debate is just like on what specific charge is he really guilty on. But there's no actual conversation between people of different sides about whether these are all trumped up charges, no pun intended, because everyone knows these charges are just clumped together misdemeanors to try to blow it into something that looks like a felony, so they can have this convicted felon as being, you can't vote for him, he's a convicted felon talking point. This is the death of discourse, and it is also the death of legal regulation in any meaningful way. Again, this is obvious to us. But if there's no discourse and there's no legal regulation without moral deference, and there's no moral deference without religiosity and spirituality, we've just declared dead an entire avenue of the last 200 years post-Enlightenment political project, which is to essentially run morally neutral secular states, which are impossible, and everyone can observe they're impossible. If they're not impossible in the absolute, you are at least observing that our current iteration of this problem is falling apart. The second thing, human desire, or not the fourth thing, I should say, point 4. Although you could combine these two things, point 4, there's two avenues that we've considered universally good that are obviously have to be constrained. If you're growing up in the 20th century, human desire was always good, and technology was always beneficial, perhaps nuclear weapons notwithstanding, perhaps some germ theory things, germ testing notwithstanding. But by the 21st century, we weren't even worried about nuclear weapons or gain of function research. We were all gung ho on technology. More technology, better. More fulfillment of human desire, better. This essentially, the optimism on both these fronts, essentially were ended with. The creation of one thing, the creation of two things, social media and the iPhone. It's pretty, and you could go on for any other. I won't harp on gain of function viral research and the wonders that has brought us, or the horrors of drone warfare, or all the problems that AI is currently causing and will cause in the future because people are fundamentally misusing it. But post at least the development of social media and the development of the iPhone, which brought the wonders of social media specifically to women, and we'll talk more about that later, it is really obvious that human desire to be healthy must be restrained. Progressives pretend like this is not true. Progressives pretend like people are self-regulating, but that's not what you see. That's not what you see in progressive cities. That's not what you see in youth culture. That's not what you see anywhere. And furthermore, to take another step, and one that's going to become increasingly relevant as we enter into these new technologies, that while not sort of radically different from the old ones, are obviously more intrusive and more controlling, technology, not to be disastrous to the human project, has to be governed. It has to be told no. I mean, we didn't let people walk around with breeder reactors We didn't let people build breeder reactors in their backyard. We didn't allow people to accumulate personal stockpiles of nuclear warheads. You can say no to technology, and we have in the past. But we somehow forgot this because the whole idea of technology and human desire were that in the absence of any kind of moral system that could provide a teleology for why what we were doing was good, we had to substitute progress for just increasing technology and the increasing fulfillment of human desire. 4 and 5, these promises are dead. 6, different groups of humans have different unchangeable behaviors. I guess I have to take myself out of the picture here. My apologies. And governments have to reflect this. I don't know what to say. We could make this easy for our normie conservative friends by just talking about the groups being male and female, but at least male and female are radically different. And since we agree that you can notice that men and women are radically different and not be sexist, as most of our normie friends would agree, I think you can probably at this point notice that there are key differences between other ethnic groups that are, whatever their origin, not changeable by managerial policy. We can't regulate these things out of existence, and they fundamentally cause different groups of people to behave in different ways. Nigerians do not behave like Han Chinese, and the government has to reflect this. I guess it doesn't have to reflect this, but all attempts to ignore this have been totally disastrous for our societies, and are currently tanking the West in one way, shape, or another. Furthermore, because of all the statements we have listed before, core loyalties in government must be particular to a people and a place. There is no way to run a government that is neutral or abstracted or universalizable. You might have a universal ruler. You could have a king of earth, but people would not be loyal to the king of earth, nor would they have some kind of core political discourse with the king of earth. It essentially would be a government qua government, just a government of will. And insofar as they came up with minimal rules to regulate how smaller polities behaved relative to each other, those things would essentially be creating boundaries and creating very, very neutral regulations. And then finally, and this is also one that's increasingly obvious, past social arrangements are sustainable in a way that contrived alternatives are not. We have been at this process of trying to invent replacements for old social orders that were torn down in the 20th century, and they have all almost to a item failed. There have been complete failures across the board. I'm having a hard time thinking of an exception. Of course, my favorite one here is always the sexual revolution because of how it kind of unrolled on itself gradually. And because of its fruits are just kind of easily observable in the modern day. But regardless of the fact, or another one would be birth rates. And this is something that, people try to think their way around this. People are like, how are we going to make a new family arrangement that will have people having more children without treading on things like fulfilling all human desires at all times and being 100% consensual and not constraining people's liberties? Well, you can't. You can't do that because it's fundamentally impossible. These 8 things are just anthropological observations about our political reality. And and I hate to say this because it sounds absolutist, and I'm not typically a person who goes in for absolutism, But if you're not aware, now I'll take my video away just so you guys can see this. If you're not aware and on board of all 8 of these things, a lot of these things are even kind of redundant. A few of them I broke out. They could probably be unified into one, but I made them 2 just to be explicit. But if you're not on board with all 8 of these things, you're missing a major vector of how our society is falling apart. The reason why our society is having difficulty. I guess I could have added, I could have added a 9th one about how moral systems inevitably influence our academia and corrupt our academia, which is why we cannot see the debt bomb coming, which is why we can't see corruptions in medical science, which is why we cannot see corruptions in climate science. But once you include that our ontology is also being crushed by these bad spiritual and moral practices, our society's problems are basically because we can't acknowledge these 8 or 9 points. We can't sit here, we can't look at our problems and actually take stock of them and try to address them, because to address them would be to cross one of these lines. And if we cross one of these lines, then we have to admit at some level that the way we've set up our society is fundamentally unsustainable. And this kind of gets me to the point. The common thread in all of these things is this process of bargaining. It's this process of cope. And we have to kind of go through these charades of why reality is true. And always there's this idea that you can say something and paper over the truth. So the normies, as I said before, the normies are telling me that a system that spins a bunch of misdemeanors into a felony and prosecutes one of the opposition candidates so they can cripple a campaign is a democracy. And that my failure to acknowledge its sacred democratic nature makes me a traitor. That's insane. That's cope. It's cope. I have to literally lie to myself to believe that and tell myself a rather unconvincing lie. And you get this from the red state reality too. I mean, like Red America is being invited to believe that their religion exists for the purpose of shoring up a constitutional order that was invented by Christians in the 18th century explicitly for a Christian people. When no one else in this society, and certainly not as rulers, are Christian. They want to say this. They want to say this because they don't want to have to acknowledge the reality. Normie Blue America does not want to acknowledge the fact that they are essentially just gaming the system to get their desired political end. Red America does not want to acknowledge the fact that the constitutional order that may have somewhat existed in the 19th century has long since died. Conversely, conversely, the far left is just trying to keep up the charade. They're trying to keep up this idea that some external Gnostic demiurge, be it capitalism or the patriarchy or fascism or the mid-century Germans, is holding them down, and they're fighting in their Marvel movie conflict against these oppressive forces. And if they win this Marvel movie conflict against the demiurges that run modern society by staying in their Twitch hug boxes and reading the news to each other while they play video games, that this is going to make reality itself conform to their wills, even when it obviously is not. They can't even live in the societies that they promoted the creation of. They vote for policies and then flee from them, and they refuse to own anything that corresponds to their ideas because they're essentially decided to just plug themselves into an illusion and then rage against the demiurge that maintains it, even if the demiurge is they themselves. And then finally, and I guess, so the group that preoccupies me the most are the right-wing intellectuals. And there's been quite a division in this last year, with especially on Substack, with a variety of people on the right going, okay, well, let's we agree that the dissident ideas have a point, but let's try to fix it. Let's try to come up with a hack. Let's try to come up with that crazy idea that's going to allow us to have our cake and eat it too. I don't know what to say. We're bargaining. We're bargaining with all of this because there's no real reason to reject these ideas. I mean, I've had a number, but despite the fact that I've been not doing these podcasts, not talking to you wonderful people in monologue form, I've been writing a lot on Substack. And subsequently, I've been engaging with people in the comments and on Twitter, and even calling people and having conversations with people, especially people who are kind of on the center left, center right. We know you're kind of right, but we can't go all the way. And what I get are these kind of mewling pleas. Like, you're right, but it's unfair. You're right, but it's mean. You're right, but it's unpopular. This won't sell to people. It will lose. It's not a good look. It's not fashionable to believe in these things. It's not fashionable to believe. But the problem with this thing is that this isn't a political platform. This is a political reality. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. These ideas, these core dissonant ideas, this is essentially what I'm reacting against, or not reacting against. This is the inputs that will make up our outputs. These are the things that we have to deal with if we're going to be responsible leaders. And complaining about, if you tell the truth, you'll lose. Well, if I don't tell the truth and society is ruled by these ideas and people and new leaders are taught that these ideas are true, then anything I do as a ruler will be immediately undone by my successors because they'll be raised with these lies. Or, alternatively, we'll have a technical solution. I'm particularly aware of this with Malcolm and Simone Collins, who that was one of the articles I wrote about when my long absence from doing these podcasts was their project to kind of create a progressive friendly way to be pro-natalist. And we'll do this by inventing our own religion. The problem is you can't invent your own religion because you don't believe in your own religion because you invented it. It's a self-defeating proposition from the outset. It's a self-defeating proposition because it destroys the utility it relies on. Now, why are they doing this? They read the article. I know Malcolm read the article. He enjoyed it. He retweeted it. He complimented me. We talked about doing a podcast together, but there's never any answer. And the thing is that there is no answer to this objection because it's obviously what's going on. The thing is, this is kind of the perpetual motion machine logic. If people remember the internet from back in the day, there would be this idea for making a magnetically driven car where the car has a lever and then it has a magnet in front of it, and the magnet will drag the car forward and you indefinitely go forward. That's more or less what invent your own religion to have children does. It does not work because it's not sustainable. It is not sustainable because it's not an actual belief system. And even when you dig down into it's not even like, okay, maybe they could invent a religion, right? If they decided to start worshiping alligators or turtles, or they invented a new god like L. Ron Hubbard did with Dianetics or Scientology, then we might be getting to something that's a little bit closer to invent your own religion, and it might work. But what happens is when you get to the Simone and Malcolm Collins idea of religion, what they've put in place of God is like this eternal self-referential. History is moving in a progressive direction. That progressive direction is God. What is that progressive direction? Well, the progressive direction is God, and God is the progressive direction that history always moves into. It's just a circle. All it is their values that refer back to themselves as if they're eternal values, because they say that those values will win in the future, which of course is only true if it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is 100% circular philosophical reasoning, and it can be picked apart by anyone who just decides to disagree with it and interrogates its fundamental assumptions in the same way that new atheists interrogated the fundamental assumptions of something like Christianity. But the problem is that this is just kind of where we are. Where we are is that essentially nobody essentially nobody, it's very few people inside the core intellectual class of our society, who are increasingly realizing that these ideas are true or partially true, and certainly more true than the progressive claptrap that they've been promoting. They have no desire to accept them. And so all we have is like this long list of copes going on. And I guess this kind of brings me back to where I left you guys. This is a slide from the previous one. Now, I said I wouldn't mention women, but I guess I can't really avoid talking about this in the abstract. I will refrain from mentioning any names like I did last time, which I got a lot of flack for on Twitter, or at least in the DMs. But I have to kind of mention this in passing. So this was a reaction that a lot of people had. I think this was largely on Twitter, but eventually came to Substack, where just an enormous number of specifically female commentators immediately started rebelling against hard right or dissident right ideas. So sort of the classic reactionary ideas as embodied by those 18 points. Now, the problem is that there weren't any actual intellectual objections to those points. There was just a very aggressive opinion that the people who had these ideas and were promoting them needed to be countersignaled hard. And this kind of came from me at the worst possible time. This was just when I was planning the event in New Jersey. And the thing is, I work 50 hours a week at least, at least 10 hours a day, and sometimes a little bit on the weekends. I'm raising a family with very, very little family support out here, even though there's only one kid. I don't have a lot of time. And the time that I didn't spend doing podcasts or writing articles, it all went into organizing. and this big female backlash kicks up right when I'm completing this event, paying for it because I had to eat a little bit of the cost, and go, oh wow, we've created a template for creating mini events in basket weaving groups. Huge success. We can replicate this and take this everywhere. This is a step forward for our organizing efforts. And then the internet is a buzz about how everyone on the dissident right is a bunch of terminally online incels that never do anything or organize. And this impression is entirely kicked up from online. What is the explanation for this? And this came in waves last time. As a matter of fact, the second wave of the great female backlash of 2024, it happened after the time I commented on it in my first video. The problem is just that the political incentives of holding these ideas aren't fun. Those 8 or 9 points that we reviewed, you are right, they are not a good look. They essentially coalition you with a lot of people who are very angry on Twitter. And though I really wish you could pay attention to the things going on in real life and not on Twitter, especially from online anonymous trolls and not actually named people, the general impression and what I think kicked off this backlash is these are coded as low class. Dissident ideas or right-wing ideas are coded as low class, and they have no way of getting to be high class inside a time frame that we would care about. Here's sort of the article that immediately kicked off round 2 for me, and the one that got me in hot water with a lot of people when I commented on Mary Harrington's article about Lauren Southern. Now, where do I begin with Lauren Southern? I feel like this is Lauren Southern. There's a history here for me, right? And I guess I can't talk about this tweet that got me in trouble. And I mean, it was really a retweet of a James Kilpatrick tweet, but I have to kind of go and I have to take you back and go over this article by Lauren Southern, or this article by Mary Harrington about Lauren Southern, and then subsequently also my experience with Lauren Southern. So Lauren Southern and I have never spoken. We were never friends. When she had her heyday, I was so small as to be microscopic. Sargon of Akkad was the only person that talked to me that was at all notable in the scene. And I was aware of Lauren, and I never really was a huge fan of hers. I thought that she didn't have particularly interesting ideas, which I'm sorry, Lauren, you really don't. She was an okay expose journalist. She was a person who, at least towards the midpoint of her career, liked going all sorts of places and doing documentaries. And she did one on South Africa, which brought a lot of attention to the plight of the Dutch Afrikaners in Africa and the farm murders. And then she did one about the migrant crisis that got her in trouble with Patreon. And then, eventually, much later after she returned, she did another documentary about the mass graves hoax that got numerous churches burnt in Canada, including, at least an attempted arson of a church that my wife and I met at in Victoria. And, a variety of other vandalisms of various statues in that city that I'm still a little bit bitter about because I frankly like them. And seeing them permanently destroyed for a lie against my ethnic group is a little bit, it makes people angry for some reason. It's amazing how that works. But the problem with Lauren Southern is if you're aware of kind of her optics, it kind of went in phases. The first phase of Lauren Southern was just another e-girl who was repeating the Gamergate talking points. Then Lauren became the nationalist influencer. She became sort of the face of the great nationalist revolt of 2016, 2017, the embodiment of Brexit and, the darling of the alt-right, this kind of vaguely defined movement that was surrounding Richard Spencer during the time. The thing about Lauren is that she was a very mysterious person, and she always had scandals erupt around her. As soon as 2017 hit, it was like every other month there would be a scandal surrounding Lauren Southern. I don't know how many of these scandals were true or not, but the whole endeavor just attracted scandal after scandal after scandal. And also, Lauren was the spear point for social media bans. They were the ones that she was the person who they essentially piloted their campaign to kick everyone off of Patreon. She was the one that became sort of the big boogeyman for the alt-right movement after Charlottesville. And all throughout it, the image she had back in those days was of somebody who was interested in ethnic nationalism, in nationalism more properly, maybe, although she never particularly said it, with kind of a white nationalist twist of lemon on the side. That was always Lauren Southern's flavor. That was always her shtick, at least in the early days. And one of the things that the person I remember talking to Lauren Southern the most about was this guy called Faraday Speaks. So Faraday Speaks was this guy that appeared in 2019 claiming that he had been brainwashed by the alt-right. In particular, he claimed to have been brainwashed by Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux. And he was obsessed with these people, especially Lauren Southern. And I remember talking to the guy because I always reach out to these guys. I'm going, oh my God, he's a Fed. Well, actually, in hindsight, of all people that were ever accused of being Feds, he's pretty much at the top of my list. But the guy was incredibly unstable. And I would talk to him and kind of try to talk him down from, help him work out his ideas because he didn't want to be on the left. And I could put sort of the concepts of the right wing in insane enough terms so that he was forced to accept them. And but he always retreated back to, oh no, they brainwashed me. They're horrible people. They just want to kill. They just want to harm ethnic minorities. That's what Lauren Southern is. So then around 2020, right about the end of when Faraday Speaks went totally nuts and kind of came after me properly. Right around surprise, January 6th, right? You can tell when people are you can always predict when people are on their worst behavior, right? When the FBI is gearing up for when the feds are gearing up for a major sting operation. Lauren Southern gets married, and Faraday Speaks is overjoyed that it's to a not white person. And I kind of do double take. I'm like, really? She's marrying a person? I mean, wasn't she with a totally different guy 3 months ago? And what did she just meet him and immediately marry him? And of course, when I offer any question as to why Lauren Southern's jumping into this marriage, What's the immediate reaction from Faraday? Oh, you're racist. You're racist. You're a secret crypto Nazi, Dave. Are you questioning this? This is exactly what all the Nazis are doing. They're questioning Lauren Southern's relationship to a non-white person. She's seen the light and has become not racist with this marriage. And I'm like, okay, whatever, man, it's cool. And then Faraday went on this really, really long rant about how, and I guess I am kind of spinning up rumors here, but this is sort of important. The story that Faraday came up with was that the Sellners, Brittany and Martin Sellner, had disowned Lauren Southern because she had married outside of her race, that she had miscegenated. This was the story they were going with, which we now know to be completely false. We now know from Lauren Southern's own admission that the story was completely false. And this was just being kicked up. But what was so funny about all of this is that Lauren Southern was not known in this time, either in her 2016 incarnation or her 2017 to 18 to 19 incarnation. She was never known as being a trad Catholic influencer. This was not even a really big thing. The trad Catholic stuff that was sort of outside of the mainstream Catholic sphere that you see around First Things and sort of fringe communities that are specifically religious, the political trad Catholic stuff, that came in more around late 2019, early 2020. It was way after Lauren Southern's time. And to just give you an illustration, during the big right-wing internet blood sports era, the Worski and JF Gariepi wanted to have a debate over the existence of God. And they wanted to get two trad Catholic influencers, right? Two trad Catholic influencers. They could only find two. One of them was Nick Fuentes, and one of them was me. And that was the first and the last time I ever spoken on Nick Fuentes was on this Worski panel about trad Catholicism. And the reason why they had to resort to me, a micro blogger who was, I don't know, probably below 20,000 at that stage. I was really small. That was before actually most of my popular videos. I was just it's because there were so few people doing this that had kind of a religious connotation about them, or who made that a big deal in their profiles. You look at Instagrams of Lauren Southern at the time, and it's all her in like bikinis and stuff like that. There's none of this sort of like trad girl, I'm going to make golden grams from scratch in a dirndl type thing, or here's me with a chapel veil kneeling in front of the sacrament. This was not Lauren Southern's image. And going to the wedding, there was not that image either. And so, from my perspective, she just got married. Then in something like a record time, the marriage collapses. Maybe predictably, maybe not, under circumstances that seem completely insane. And we're kind of confronted with, fast forward 4 years in which Lauren Southern speed runs having a child and getting a divorce from her husband, or I guess her husband divorcing her. And now Lauren Southern is the icon of the trad life. She's now the icon of religious conservatism, even though I never remembered her that way. And at the same time, we have all these kind of weird confessions. Just so we clear the air about this, Lauren Southern, when she returns from being divorced by apparently her psychotic husband, she confesses that the reason why she broke off her friendship with Brittany Sellner and Martin Sellner had nothing to do with them or their opinions on her marriage, although maybe they should have told her not to get married to this guy. I think a lot of people should have told her not to get married to this guy, although from my memory, anyone speaking like that was immediately considered accused of being racist, because apparently she was marrying a psycho guy. But apparently the reason why the friendship was broken off between Brittany and Martin had nothing to do with concerns over miscegenation, and everything to do with Lauren getting spooked by the feds, who were on her like a hawk. She was getting trailed by the feds majorly, which is why it's so surprising that no one ever mentions that her psycho husband, who was doing all sorts of nutso abusive things to her in a record amount of time right after their baby was born, and met and married her in an insanely short amount of time. No one mentions the fact that he was working for the feds. He was a government employee. I like to think that I'm a pretty incredulous person. I like to think that I don't go in for conspiracy theories. But these points of the story are the most interesting parts of the story. The reason why her friendships ended with the European right was because of Fed involvement. Then she marries a Fed and ends up in this horrible situation where she's devastated. And now we encounter Lauren Southern on the opposite end. Okay, digression over. That's the Lauren Southern story. And I really feel sympathetic to her. I want to say that right off the front. I 100% believe her account of events insofar as the interpersonal stuff went. And it sounds like her husband was acting like a psychopath. Like he just flipped one day and decided to act like a complete, like basically sleeping with the enemy type abusive husband, to the point where any woman would have to seek some kind of at least temporary separation to put up with this, because it was way, 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 way over the line. But now we arrive in 2024 and we get the Lauren Southern story from excellent right-wing author Mary Harrington, who I'm a big fan. I can't say enough good things about Mary Harrington. But this is the problem with the Mary Harrington article. It might be the most credulously written article of all time. And this is connecting much to my main point, I promise. I go on this big digression about Lauren Southern. The way that Mary Harrington wrote about this was that the reason why Lauren Southern married a psycho. The reason Lauren Southern married a psycho was she was a trad Catholic. And trad Catholics encourages people to marry psychos with almost no oversight. And they're all, and this is the point of the article, Mary Harrington reviews, there's all of these trad Catholic women who are locked in these relationships with absolutely psychotic people. And they're trapped because their ideology, their online ideology that they believed because they were trads online, led them into these disastrous relationships. And the moral of the story is, guess what? The online ideology of marriage in a trad way just doesn't work in the real life. I mean, good Lord. I mean, just the progressive narrative can't win both coming and going. You tell Lauren Southern that she shouldn't marry the guy so quickly at the beginning of the marriage, and you're a racist. You react when this very, very hasty marriage obliterates itself, and suddenly you're contributing to the fact that she stayed in the marriage or began it to begin with. I don't know how to react to this, but the problem is just this. And Mary Harrington, I want to say this again, amazing author. I loved her book. I can't say enough good things about her articles, or at least most of her articles. She asked none of the questions I did about why she was being monitored by the feds and why this led her to break off relationships with people like the Sellners, according to her own statements now on YouTube publicly for everyone to see. There's no examination of that. There are no examinations of the stated conflicts between her husband's job and her political career, which seemed like they must have had some political exacerbation behind them. But the more important thing is Mary Harrington was somebody who believes that marriage is a healthy institution. In her other articles, she's at least implied that. So why is she crafting an article that uses Lauren Southern as a cautionary tale against marriage? I mean, I got married the same year as Lauren Southern. I mean, I certainly am very happily married. I see my wife is in the chat. She can say if she's very happily married or not. I hope that she'll say yes. But I mean, I haven't, and then tons of people have gotten married in this sphere at the exact same year. It was kind of a marriage year, strangely enough. How did Lauren become the avatar of this stuff? And furthermore, was that the point that Mary wanted to communicate? Because inevitably after Mary publishes this article, Mary Harrington publishes this article, it immediately gets reused by virtually every progressive outlet to dunk on traditional marriage, aka normal marriage, like traditional marriage. Did Lauren Southern have a trad marriage? Do I have a trad marriage? I have a marriage that is basically operating under the same rules as my parents' marriage and my grandparents' marriage. I guess it's trad, but I mean, I'm not a trad Catholic. I'm a Catholic. And people, this is something that's unusual at the conference I went to, the OGC conference. I mean, I don't know why I have a reputation being a trad Catholic. I mean, I guess because I follow the rules of Catholicism, like I follow the catechism, like just following the rules. It's like the fat person that thinks that, a 50-minute walk is like a strenuous exercise. Because I follow the rules of the Catholic Church to the best of my abilities, I'm trad. And they were shocked to understand that I go to a Novus Ordo church. I do very much like the Latin Mass. I want to see the Latin Mass to be integrated, to be part of the church. But my vision is that it's more or less a special occasions type thing. And I don't want to get into an argument with my co-religionists about whether it should be the normal thing or the unusual thing. But I think that all of the above is my philosophy. So I'm not trad, right? But this is the narrative. And I told people at the time, I could see writing this article. I could see writing an article like this about transgenderism. Like, somebody transitioned and then they regretted it, and this is why it's really, really dangerous to promote transgenderism online, because people will fall into these patterns of being. They'll fall into these patterns of activity, and then they'll try it and it will obviously not work out for them. And I feel that in many cases, that's exactly what's going on with this transgenderism thing. But the most important thing is, if I had written that article, I would understand that the point of that article would be to discourage people from engaging in transgender cosmetic surgeries. I would understand that would be the point of writing that article. I don't think that there was any appreciation on Miss Harrington's side that the way that this article would be used would be to essentially dunk on what is your healthiest option for family formation. That is inevitably how it would be used, even if it was not the author's intention. And this is just like this incredibly frustrating dimension of this thing, because what I kept on coming up against all of these conflicts like this. It was very, very popular, and everyone, especially in the wake of, there's this other thing that happened, was in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned. There was a historic backlash against abortion or anti-abortion across the country, to the point that states that were deep red were essentially passing pro-abortion laws to undo their previous attempts to ban abortion when it was impossible to ban it because of the Supreme Court ruling. They had sort of laws that automatically kicked in after Roe was overturned. And so there was a backlash against that. And so everyone was for a while counter-signaling religious conservatives, and still are for a certain to a certain extent, because religious conservatives are particularly unpopular at this given moment in time. And another kind of brick in the wall for this moment came when I unfortunately got into a little bit of what we older millennials used to call flame wars with one particular individual, all this Tracing Woodgrains, who appeared briefly on Alex Kashuta's podcast, probably as part of her attempt to reach out to a more diverse set of people. Now, Tracing Woodgrains is what I would call him an anti-woke moderate. Sort of the variety of someone. I mean, the problem is that any comparison I make will be immediately frowned upon. He is essentially associated with the Slate Star Codex crowd, I believe, and Scott Alexander, even though that's not an ideology. But his role is essentially, I'm a gay guy who is an ex-Mormon, and now I go around talking about how religion is impossible, trad relationships are, passe, and they're not going to work in the modern world, and we need to re-engineer all human organizations to make things work again. And this is my plan to do gay surrogacy, because I care so much about pronatalism that I need to have a surrogate child. And the problem is well, I mean, not the problem. Alex Kashuta is a wonderful interviewer, and this conversation went down. But I remember this conversation a lot because initially, surrogacy is a weird thing. Gay surrogacy is a very weird thing. It's not very weird. My opinions on this thing have modified largely like all my other opinions have, but this is a very strange one because it's funny because the more you pull at this thing, the more it kind of comes undone. So I obviously was a person who was very pro gay surrogacy when I was a libertarian, and then was a libertarian progressive, or then sometimes just a progressive during my college years. And I kept on supporting this practice of surrogacy, and even though it created abortions when I was inching in towards Catholicism, and my logic was, okay, I know surrogacy causes abortions, but it causes the termination of fetuses, and that's technically killing a human life. But so, small zygotes died all the time in natural procreation, and these people are trying to create new life. So and they're not intending to kill these unborn fetuses, unborn children, depending on how you phrase it. I probably would have called them fetuses back in the day, so it sounds unusual to use my current language for them. They're not intending to do that. So, it's not something that I would do. I don't want to encourage it, but it's a legitimate thing. And, it's good that people want to pass on their genes. And even as I adopted Catholicism and learned more about sort of the theology of the body and the various different logics behind Catholic moral stances on sexuality, I kind of kept on holding out a torch for surrogacy because it was in the service of life. And I'm always much more willing to make exceptions for the service of life than I am for the services of death. The problem here is that this is a gay surrogacy. If you look at it for 5 minutes unadulterated, like just take the facts and put them in front of your eyes, and you think about it, not in like the superficial way I did as a culture, but like actually think about what's going on. It immediately becomes horrifying. And Tracing Woodgrains is this guy he's anti-woke. He's anti all of the same transgender stuff that we oppose, and that everyone, all of the crazy racial stuff. And this is one of the reasons why he was on Alex's podcast, and it's still a great podcast. Everyone share and subscribe to Alex Kashida. She does a great job. I always offer that disclaimer. But the guy's logic is nuts for the surrogacy stuff. At base, the basic question behind surrogacy are, why do gay men need to have a child more than a child needs to have its mother? That's the fundamental question, and all the arguments for surrogacy get around that. But it gets darker. I mean, you can examine it. And I got onto an enormous debate with Tracing Woodgrains about this, in which I kind of just went nuclear. And of course, what does the guy give? Oh my God, the sweet mystery of life. I'm creating life. Yes, you're creating life. Good job. But just because you've created life does not give you the right to abuse that life. And taking away a child from their mother is abusing life. I mean, a rapist could use this explanation. Oh, I created life by raping my daughter. Oh, wow. Gee, I couldn't have done something right. I created a new life. Are you going to tell this child its existence is wrong? No, I'm not going to tell the child its existence is wrong. I'm going to tell that your actions creating that child in the way you did are wrong, and your actions after that child were born are wrong, which they obviously are when you took the child away from its mother. I mean, it's just the problem is it's so fundamental and so easy to argue this stuff, and you get down into the explanations. Woodgrain says, "Oh, they're not even. The mother's child, the birth mother, the mother who carries the child in her body. Did you know that for gay men don't even like having the women who bear the children be the genetic donor? They want other women." And then you go, well, why do you want other women, Woodgrains? Why is that? I mean, we know from preliminary studies, and certainly this is in line with what we would expect, that women are much, 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 much more likely to have miscarriages and health crises that threaten their life. Women have died doing this. Women have died giving birth to surrogate children. And the pregnancy is made harder when the baby that they're carrying in their body is not related to them, as you would expect. Right? As you would expect. So why do you care that it's not her, such that you would seek a donor that would increase the risk of pregnancy to her. Well, it's because they want to make the argument stronger. They want to sever the relationship the child has with the mother, and by intentionally manufacturing a genetic difference between the mother and the child, they could increase their own legal claim on the child after it's born, which is insane. They're creating harm to increase their legal claim on a child that they would ordinarily have no right to. I can't begin to express how fucked up this is. And what's so increasingly interesting is that, I go on and listen to Woodgrain's other stuff. He does a podcast, and while he's anti-woke, e.g., he's against white racism, this guy frequently goes on tirades against ethno-nationalism and against people who believe that they want to have nations comprised of people who are like them genetically. Okay, so you think the people who want genetic ancestor, do you think the people who want to live around people who are like them genetically are horrific racists that are subhuman and deserve no consideration? Okay. But you're so concerned with your own genes that you're going to risk a woman's life, pay an enormous amount of money to these women, and then similarly also engage in a number of practices that will increase the risk of miscarriage and harm to her, just so you can sever a child away from the mother at the moment of its maximum vulnerability so that it's genetically related to you, even though there will be less barriers to you through adoption. It's nuts. None of this makes any sense. None of this makes any sense. And the arguments just fall away. There's a Louise Perry, who's another great podcaster who's British. She interviewed one of the detractors of surrogacy. And I would encourage you to view Louise Perry's podcast on surrogacy if you want to hear sort of the explanations given to you with all the stuff I'm saying in full. I can't remember the person that she did the podcast with, but it was one of these anti-surrogacy advocates, and she had all of the sort of extended documentation on all the horror stories. You listen to 5 minutes of that podcast, and you just have to ask yourself, what the hell are we doing, allowing it? I mean, even if you believe in surrogacy for some kind of straight couples who are people dealing with fertility problems, the idea that this is being elected to from a group of people who have no right to expect children in the first place. And we are playing ball with this for a cosmetic choice to fulfill a genetic line, which they've said in every other instance that they don't care about, is the picture of insanity. And again, what's the point of this? What's the point of this reaction to surrogacy? Well, what was so funny about this is with a few exceptions, it seemed like almost all of the women who engaged with this topic had a very, very difficult time pushing back on it. And the reason is that every time Woodgrains would kind of like lose an argument, he would immediately try to personalize it. He would immediately accuse me of making a personal attack against him. I had no desire to do a personal attack against Mr. Tracing Woodgrains. My concern was on surrogacy itself, surrogacy properly. And the fact that it extended to something that he was doing is coincidental, but the immediate reaction was personalized. Oh my God, woe is me. I grew up in a Mormon household, and now I'm just trying to find my way and build a family and create new life, and all the sob stories, the personal stuff that has nothing to do with this, and people would actually support this. There was an understanding that okay, maybe this is a good point. Maybe this is something we have to listen to. And I was kind of just standing back and watching women in particular come to the defense of this. This is one of these moments where I don't exactly know how to put this, and I don't want to Insofar as the great female backlash of 2024 had any impact on me, it was this. It was watching women kind of step in and defend this practice of gay male. I can't help but call it cosmetic surrogacy because there's no justification for it other than I just cosmetically want to have the baby cooked up new inside the body of woman, it not being related to one of the two partners, just so I can have it and take it away from the mother, even though we're intentionally confusing that status to secure our own legal ownership over the child and secure its separation from the mother who bore it, and separate it from the care it already received when the child was in the womb. First of all, on the merits, there is just no utilitarian case for doing this. There's absolutely no overall benefit to society to allow this. We're not getting any money from this. We're not noticeably increasing the birth rates. We're actually probably decreasing them. And we're creating all sorts of problems for children down the road as we manufacture children that are not related to their birth mother, and then separating them from said birth mother and genetic mother to be raised in a situation with very, very, very little oversight. Now, and we're turning it into an entirely mercenary issue. There's no utilitarian case for this. Also, if we go beyond the utilitarian case, there's an incredibly bad real politics case for this, because if you're somebody who's reasonably aligned and reasonably aware of how real politics works, and you've seen how gay marriage works, you know what this conversation is actually about. What was gay marriage about? Was gay marriage just about gay men getting married in the privacy of their own churches? Not that they went to churches. Was it just about gay men getting married privately in their homes and then minding their own business? Was that what happened after gay marriage became a thing? That's what gay marriage, the debate on gay marriage, what it actually was about was, can appeals to equality allow gay men to rewrite fundamental heterosexual, even though I hate that word, fundamental traditional institutions at a whim to be more equitable on their own whims? Gay men don't get married a lot, and lesbian women do get married a lot but get divorced a lot. The institution was not utilized, but what it did create the pattern of, and what it established the pattern of, is that from now on, the gay community gets to rewrite any social regulation that it feels personally offends it. And any safeguards we have around children or women will immediately get undone to promote and to alleviate the feelings of inequity that gay men have, or gay women for that matter, if that ever was really an issue. I guess it's less so in surrogacy. And surrogacy works the exact same way. What is surrogacy actually about? Surrogacy is about the demands of gay men mean that they have the right to the children, and then that right overwhelms the right of a child to its own mother. Now, we've already discussed the harm. Well, I guess we haven't completely discussed it. It's very obvious the harm that pertains to the child in this instance. It's separated both from its genetic mother and also its birth mother. And those two people are also now two different people, which creates a crisis in and of itself in most cases where this is done. Furthermore, the separation from that and being raised in an unorthodox environment also creates huge problems for these children, of which you can see many consequences. And I don't need to refer you to Mark Regnerus's great work on this, the best work of its kind, in my opinion, and the only kind that actually takes getting large sample sizes seriously. And there's no reason that this situation will evolve any better, and every reason to believe that it will evolve much, much, much worse. As is always said, the most dangerous thing to have in the house is unmarried male men who are not related to the child they are raising. Is this going to be better? Obviously not. But let's just leave aside the harm to the child. Let's talk about the downstream impact to women. Like, if you can think about this in more than just the initial utilitarian way or how it's sold to you propagandistically. Let's just say you only care about women. Okay, So gay men claim that they have a right to children. They say they don't, right? They say, oh, we're not claiming a right to children. We just want the freedom to, purchase one. Okay, great, but it must be a right because we've already demonstrated harm that comes to the child from being separated from their mothers. So there must be something as powerful or more powerful in the form of a right that allows you to violate that child's right to have their mother. Okay, so it's a right to get children. Well, ladies, if you understand political theory, if you understand real politics, not the phony baloney bullshit that's been fed to you from the 20th century, you know that every right has a corresponding responsibility. Gay men's right to children means gay men's right to women's bodies. It necessitates the creation of a class of women who will be put in a financial circumstance where they will be compelled to bear gay men's children. That's the only way. That's the only way that they could have a right to it. What gives them the right? Their money? Money gives you the right to a child? Gay men are creating a universal right. That's what they actually want. That's what this debate is actually about. And that universal right to children will imply a universal obligation to have access to women's bodies, probably through the importation of desperately poor women. That's what's actually being debated over, and that's what's being agreed to. Women, death is coming to your door in this form. And what's the reaction? Oh, well, feels bad. No women like this. No reasonably aware women see this and don't get a feeling, kind of an ick feeling in their gut that something's going on that's wrong. But opposing it harshly, that's mean. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be mean to this nice guy. He has had a hard life. We need to be nice to this guy. And this is what happened again and again, like this appeal to being nice, this appeal that, oh, well, we have to put aside our strong objections and kind of take a back seat to narratives about niceness and narratives about harm. The problem here, I think, is there's just a fundamental disconnect about why we're doing this. Why are we doing politics? Are we sitting around? For instance, take Mary Harrington's article. For instance, Mary Harrington is a great person and she understands what's going on. I firmly believe she's 100% online with what's going on. She understands that there needs to be a certain solidity of family relationships, and that solidity can only be conferred by something that is like marriage. Maybe she believes that we can come up with something that's like that, but there are currently no alternatives. But she's willing to write articles about how trad marriage is a sham. Where is the ownership in this is what I want to say. It seems like, okay, like she'll mourn marriage when it passes. If fewer people decide to get married, then Mary Harrington will have, she'll have an article ready to go. And a lot of these influencers will, oh my God, the sad decline of marriage. I guess late capitalism caused everyone not to get married. We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it anymore because of material conditions. It was just too expensive. And now, the world is a terrible place. Men and women hate each other. Children aren't raised in loving families. The state has to intervene and institutionally come up with a solution. We have to import immigrants to make up for excess population because the population has collapses. Oh, woe is me. Woe is marriage. But although material circumstances certainly have a role to play, and governmental decisions certainly have a role to play, insofar as we as influencers, we as public intellectuals are concerned, a large part of the problem is that young people are being told that marriage is bad. And so when we contribute to this narrative of marriage being bad or trad marriage being bad, we are making the problem worse. And we need to own that. this is what I'm kind of realizing here is that there's a fundamental lack of ownership in all of these circumstances. The same thing is true for a variety of things that I see on Substack when it comes to people like Richard Hanania and Walt Bismarck. Recently, I was on Walt Bismarck's podcast, and we talked about a variety of things. He was an ex-alt writer who came back and is now kind of, I don't know, what alt-center. I called this group the New Secular Right, but Walt didn't like that description of his current political beliefs. But essentially what he wants to do is mix choice elements of social progressivism that are popular with elements of nationalism and right-wing ideology that acknowledges difference and hierarchy. The problem with this, the problem with all of these things, is they just don't make any sense at a larger level. They immediately fall apart. And so I'm having, this conversation with Walt Bismarck, and, again, he's kind of more like a performance artist. He has crazy ideas. The crazy idea that I most notably read about and had a conversation on him about was this: we shouldn't slame slutty women. That was his big thesis. Well, the problem is that his thesis was that we would make a division between the elite and the not elite. And it would be all right if you were an elite woman and you wanted to be slutty, but it wouldn't be okay if you're middle class. But the problem is that this is public. Once the standard becomes public, because it's published on your Substack, it no longer stands up. And once everyone can see, once the plebs can see the patricians being slutty and escaping any kind of social consequence, they'll immediately copy them, which is what's happened. So this idea is immediately self-defeating, and immediately it looks cool on Substack. It's provocative. It makes you think about things. It makes you think about things in a different way. But once you actually okay, what would it take to actually do this? Is this a good idea for even a small community? It immediately crumbles into dust. And the same thing is true for all of, not all, but a variety of articles that come out of Richard Hanania. Richard Hanania always has the most provocative Substack article headlines, but none of his ideas fit together properly. They're all disconnected puzzle pieces. So he'll say something like, liberal democracy is the best thing ever, and it solves all ideas in the market, blah, 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 blah. It's the best way for deciding the truth. And then he'll write another article that says, women's tears win in the marketplace of ideas. Well, those both can't be true, Richard. Women's tears can't win in the marketplace of ideas, and liberal democracy be a good framework for making decisions. Because if liberal democracy makes decisions and women's tears win in the marketplace of ideas, then the consequence of liberal democracy is for women's tears to rule your society, which is pretty obviously not a good thing, not the least of which because it's not accountable. Hanani has this pattern of writing articles and opinion pieces that look rational in isolation, but when they come together, just kind of fall apart into ephemera. And this has got me thinking just about how we approach and talk about politics, and why the last few months in particular, just maybe take a step back. There's this problem, and maybe I'll get to it first. I mean, with the whole World War women thing, and I do appreciate these people, but I was just at the end of this whole affair, I was just kind of done with this perspective. Not because I didn't emotionally appreciate their objections. I certainly did. I appreciated the fact that they were being harassed by trolls. I really don't like a lot of the communities surrounding Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis. They're horrible influences on young men. I 100% disagree there. But the problem is that there was no collective ownership over a positive political position that was being put forward. People were getting put off by bad actors inside a movement, and their collective reaction was, okay, well, Thiel's bad, man, so we're going to publicly counter signal you for 2 months. That doesn't work. That doesn't work very well, because now you just harmed your own. I mean, maybe is it your side, right? Is are you actually part of a political movement that is commending a change in society in a direction that's more healthy, or are we just like observing a political movement that's going on in the background? It's like this content creator that I've discovered, and well, I guess I've known about him for a long while. I don't really like. I mean, his message is well enough. This is the general red pill message. This guy called Home Math. I like him mainly for the engineering diagrams he draws. And otherwise, it's just the standard red pill stuff again and again and again. But his diagrams are really, really nice. And I couldn't help but think back to his discussion about lions and lionesses. And so the lions fight, and the lionesses, what happens? They sit back and they go like, okay, when they see their mate fighting the other usurper lion, or the other pretender lion, male lion who will rule the pride, did they line up behind their man and fight him off collectively? No. They sit back and go, who's going to win? Who's going to win? I'm just observing here. Who's going to win? And and that's kind of what I feel about a variety of these things. I mean, okay, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate spectators, and then your role as a non-combatant. But is your role in this process communicating the right message to people so they take proper and healthy actions, or is it to sit back and just who's going to win? Who's going to win? I don't know. I'm just here describing the battle. I'm not a combatant here. I'm not actually an activist putting forward a position. I'm just sitting here observing a battle that's going on in front of me. And, come what may, maybe the liberals will win. Maybe feminism, maybe we'll live under Andrew Dworkin and Judith Butler world after all this is done. I don't know. I mean, I respect that, but it's not what I'm doing, right? I don't have the luxury. I guess I do. I could just become like BreadTube and turn this channel into pure entertainment and not be invested in what actually goes on. But I hope you realize that a major part of what I do in this circle is to help organize and to push forward actually good ideas. A large part of what I'm doing is activism, which is one of the reasons why I have so little time to do the actual podcasts. and the juxtaposition of this whole backlash with all of our conferences this year really highlighted that to me. There are people who are actively engaged in trying to push forward these ideas in a healthier way, and there are people that are just kind of, who's going to win? Who's going to win? I don't know. I want to be on the winning side, right? These are two different things. Are you in this battle as people who are invested in a given idea, or are you standing back and watching this stuff from afar? And I want to respect that, right? But I don't think that we can be treated as the same thing. Right? It's fine if you're just a journalist covering this stuff, or if you're discussing a social transformation extemporaneously. But I'm going to, there has to be an understanding about the role we're playing in all of these things, because I'm tired of confusing it. And I see this everywhere, right? To kind of go back to the original, the BreadTube people. I mean, the interesting thing about BreadTube, and I've talked about this endlessly. In fact, this was the main subject of my 2021 Nashville talk. I guess back then it was for Sildings, the conference that is now OGC. And I'm still affiliated with Sildings. I'm still affiliated with the Beowulf Society. And as a matter of fact, one of my major ambitions in the next year is to try to help organize a similar Beowulf conference that would be like the OGC conference, this time probably more on the West Coast, because I think that the interests are kind of separate, not entirely separate, but I think that there are two perspectives that need to be both brought into the conversation. But one of the things, that was a digression, one of the things that I immediately noticed about BreadTube right after 2020 is that almost all of them got up and said, oh, hey guys, I'm not really into this whole politics thing. I really want to be seen more as somebody who does edutainment. And by that, they meant, we're not organizing a revolution. We're not organizing a social movement. We're not going to overthrow the government or overthrow capitalism. We're going to sit back and we're going to watch the news, and we're going to complain about the Daily Wire forever and ever and ever and ever. And we're going to validate you. That's the number one thing in progressive circles. You always validate the audience. Making them feel valid is the most essential thing possible. I mean, it's a space that's dominated by that feminine intuition. And in many ways, it crippled it, because now, after 3 years of total cultural domination and 2 years of being the only radical post-liberal political side that has not been completely censored off the internet, BreadTube and LeftTube have done absolutely nothing. They've just stayed in their little boxes and have endlessly played video games and validated themselves, and have fought over meaningless drama. As far as I'm concerned, they've built no organizations. They've created no broader movements. They haven't encouraged people to take up more healthy living styles. They haven't written any books. If I have, I'm not aware of them, and I follow most of them. They've just retreated to the hug box because politics for them is entertainment. Conversely, I guess I don't know how fair I'm being here, but I certainly do feel this way about Walt Bismarck, is that to a certain degree, they treat politics, a lot of these sort of Substack writers, they treat politics like it's a fashion novelty. The point is to have an edgy, provocative idea that will get a lot of circulation for this month, and everyone will discuss it. But I don't care how that fits into a larger picture. I mean, this is just an art project, right? I did something provocative. I created a paint splatter, and this is the new thing. And I don't care that it doesn't make any sense. Like Walt Bismarck's idea that we should give reparations to the African American community under the order of trillions of dollars, with the hope that then white liberals will eventually wake up to how crazy wokeness is. I like the idea as a provocative art piece, but that is a pretty bad idea generally. I'm sorry, it's a terrible idea, because feeding more money to the progressive apparatus intentionally, or expecting white progressives to wake up to the fact that it's too crazy, is absolutely nuts. Right now in Berkeley, California, they basically indoctrinate young kids in grade school to believe in white guilt. There's even instances of them separating classes and having education on white fragility at very, very young ages. And the kids are really upset by this. And the parents are game. And you're going to wake them up because more of the federal government's infinite money printed dollars is going to your enemies. It's not a workable idea. And that's the case for most of Walt Bismarck's ideas. They're cool. They're provocative. They're interesting to read. They're cool as an art project, that they don't work. They're not consistent. And they're not consistently held. And Hanania does this at a much more believable level. He sells to a mainstream audience, but the same thing is true. I believe in human biodiversity, but I want infinite immigrants from the third world because it increases GDP. I'm sorry, Richard, it doesn't work like that. That is a dog shit idea, and it can easily be taken apart by anyone who compares it to your other ideas expressed elsewhere. The only reason why it looks good for a moment is because you can essentially ignore what we all know you've said in other articles and just focus on this particular piece, like you've hatched out of an egg, right? You don't know anything about human population dynamics. All you know is that GDP makes line go up, and and knowledge of the almost certain second order consequences is just totally beyond your comprehension. I don't know how to react to this other than to kind of consider this as politics as a fashion novelty. It allows you to get away from the harder developments or realizations of the distant talking points that I mentioned earlier, but it leads nowhere. The last one is, and this is something that I know I'm kind of guilty of too, and something I need to avoid myself. I don't mean this to be like an indictment of any of the people I'm discussing. For the last 2 months, anytime you've talked about someone in a critical way, they've gone absolutely apoplectic on Twitter. And just I'm talking about these ideas in the abstract, and we have to kind of get to the bottom of this, because this whole mode of thinking is this kind of destructive. And the other way people are absorbing politics, and this is something I'm certainly guilty of, is politics is the doomsayer. And there's two ways to do this, and I know this is, and this is going back to my history as a progressive. So when I was a really little kid, I was terrified of the end of the world. I was terrified. Every single hole in the ozone layer thing terrified me. Every single global warming scare story terrified me. Even the religious ones about the end of the world happening in the year 2000, even though, by the time it was the year 2000, I was too old to get very scared of that. I was still terrified of it. Right? All the Nostradamus religious prophecies terrified me as well. But then when I was an older kid, as in junior high, it immediately kind of flipped. Like, I loved talking about end of the world scenarios. I loved talking about this stuff. And the reason why I love talking about this thing is because when you talked about the end of the world and bad things happening, people immediately listened to you. So now that when you talked about global warming, oh my God, you're important. You're invested. All I wanted to talk about is how we were all fucked. Because when you tell people we're all fucked, they immediately start listening to you. So I was talking about nuclear war and like asteroids hitting the Earth, because like Armageddon was a popular movie at that time. And of course, all the environmental catastrophes and suitcase nukes. And, this was great because it created a certain way of generating interest around a dialectic. And at the same time, there's sort of a female equivalent of this too, where it's not really you're prophesizing doom, but it's like, oh, I'm so afraid that this bad thing is going to happen. We need to, come protect me and give me your assurances that this is going to be all right, right? And that's another way. Then the women who are afraid of the end of the world also get more attention from the men. Like so you're organized around this absolute. I mean, in this case, it was a fictional. That there were ones that were potentially real. We thought back then global warming would all kill us in 30 years. And that was almost 30 years ago, right? But it would create this kind of dynamic where you could prophesize doom and get attention because of it. And it was great. And I still kind of catch myself doing that. There's this pornography of doom. And what I'm looking for is sort of this hand-wringing way of talking about it. Like, bad things happen, but what you don't want, there's two things you want to avoid at all costs. The first thing is bad things are happening, so I'm an important person, give me money and attention. Or conversely, the female mode, bad things are going to happen, so give me comfort and assurances that you're going to protect me and maybe, treat me to something. I'm sure men do that too. If they have kind of an effeminate personality, maybe some gay men do that. But those are the two modes of it. The other way to do doomsaying is like the hand wringing thing. Like, oh my God, this is a bad thing. Look, we totally screwed over the world, and now everything is terrible. And it could have never been any different. C'est la vie, c'est la vie. This is just sic semper, not sic semper tyrannis, sic transius gloria mundi, as they say, right? That's the c'est la vie in Latin. Sic transit gloria mundi. Sic transit gloria mundi was actually, in fact, distributist trivia. In the original distributist icon, where I replaced the distributist thing with the hound, I replaced the hound with the laptop computer. The text in the laptop computer is sic transit gloria mundi. And it means, thus passes the glory of the world. And, part of it's just like, don't believe what's going on in the world. Don't follow the next big thing in the world. That is the meaning. That's the good meaning of it. But it's also the kind of hand-wringing thing, like, oh, it's so terrible, the internet's destroyed everything, AI will destroy everything, we can't do anything, all we can do is sit here and watch it all go to shit. I mean, it sells newspapers, but guys, this is where I am right now. I'm just not into this. I'm not into this mode of politics anymore. I can't say this enough. And all of the people that I beefed with that I mentioned, perhaps tracing wood grains notwithstanding, I respect Walt Bismarck as an artist. I even respect tracing Woodgrains as a podcaster. You know, I love Alex Shudo, who I mentioned. Mary Harrington's book was brilliant. But guys, we just have to, I'm tired of this politics of no ownership. I'm not interested in watching family decline and wringing our hands over how bad everything is, or hopping on the bandwagon and counter-signaling people who are trying to push back, fight against the dying of the light, and because what they're doing in the moment isn't cool or is associated with people who don't have great optics, I'm tired of pretending that this is a productive activity. Politics has to have a point and a direction to it. I'm going to go over briefly this because I'm running out of time. There needs to be a better way to do politics. Politics is about ownership. This is something that increasingly, as we do in real life conferences, and I hear what people are concerned about, you realize that people are coming to politics because they have specific concerns about their own community and their own real life. Everyone here is invested in right-wing politics working to a certain degree. But I think we need to take that ownership to a new level, or at least kind of embody it a little bit more. Politics is about ownership. That means that you actually have to own solutions. You have to own ideas. The point of my career in politics is to promote ideas that I think are going to be generative and that are going to give forward better ideas, and to promote behaviors and practices that I think are actually going to help people. It's not to witness the decline and then point and laugh when everything lands in a heap, or point and cry when everything lands in a heap. My point is to anticipate the bad things and to try to fight against them as best I can, if for no other reason than to create a bubble solution such that the devastation that they create isn't going to be extensive. Ideas do not exist in isolation. This goes back to the original 8 points. Everyone understands that those concepts about discourse being dependent on morality and morality being fundamentally not divorceable from spirituality. Everyone understands that groups are now different. They understand that the promises of mass migration are false, and the universalizability of governments is impossible. Even if there, in my opinion, are universal moral codes, universal application of them in government and the modes in which we enforce them are certainly not. Everyone realizes that, to a certain degree, older forms of modes are necessary in order to continue the human race into the future. We cannot just treat this like a buffet. Reality is a whole cloth. We have to embrace reality in its totality, and the ideas we use to confront those things are the ideology we use to confront the challenges of a reality have to be a totalizing approach. That's the most important thing I can communicate. Not like my opinion on how we should manage gay surrogacy or drugs, probably by legalizing both, in my opinion. But that's not what the point of any of this dialogue is. The point is to develop a general attitude, a general perception about what's important and what's not, what needs to come first and what needs to come last, a general strategic approach and attitude towards the world. And it needs to be unified across all areas of discourse. Because only in its unification does it become a core moral belief that we can take to the world, a core ethos, as I said in my essay about the new secular right. That's the only way it becomes powerful. That's the only way it becomes collective. As another aside, as another one of these people who are trying to retrace their steps after the insanity of 2021, Nathan Robinson, the editor of Current Affairs, who very, very famously talked about socialism and then fired all of his employees for trying to unionize. He was back in the Twitter controversy this week because he was trying to find a middle ground on the trans stuff. And the question is, Okay, so you think trans insanity is insane? So tell me, Nathan, are trans women women? This is the centrist compromise. Well, of course, trans women are women because they both contain the word women, just like cars, as in automobiles, and cars, as in boxcars, are both cars. Huh? Perfect compromise, right? No, Nathan, that's the worst compromise you could come up with because it answers no one's question. The point of the trans movement is to confuse the distinction between those two groups. If there is no confusion and linguistically there is a clear separation between trans women and cis women, then the utility of the confusion and the utility of the utility trans people get out of that is gone. Trans women are women means that trans women will be treated and described as women in all circumstances where they're not trying to lobby for intersectional Pokemon points, where they're not trying to get victim points for their own status. That's what trans women or women means. If, for instance, I replied this in a tweet that got censored off of Twitter, I think because I used the word cis, which is nuts. If we called biological women Eves and trans women Liliths to correspond to the Bible, Lilith is kind of a trans character, right? And obviously biological women are characterized by their relationship to Eve. If we just made that distinction and we internalized it, eventually we would just end right back to the place we were when we called biological women women and trans women trannies. We would just end up right back there because eventually we would internalize all the feminine stereotypes with Eve and all of the trans stereotypes with Lilith. And unfortunately, almost all of the trans stereotypes are negative. I mean, there are some negative ones associated with Eve too, right? Eve can't open pickle jars and Lilith can. But that being said, that would defeat the purpose of the entire trans movement. It would, and the trans movement would fight against that. So the insanity is the point. The insanity is the consistent position. And trying to come up with a middle ground is only putting off the point where we finally come to a conclusion, one way or the other on this. Ideas do not exist in isolation. No man is an island, and no idea is an island either. They exist as a continuum. And as such, they must be consistent. They must exhibit and express one type of central ethos in order to be powerful, in order to be collective. Politics always has a moral center. This is something that a lot of the people on the New Secular Right don't seem to understand. Somebody who also wrote an article on the New Secular Right who didn't like mine was a blogger on Substack called Anglo-Futurist, who I'm a big fan of. And, they were highly critical of my New Secular Right article, because they are in the process of trying to create a secular post-Christian version of the right wing in England. The problem is that their idea is not going to work, because what they're trying to do, Anglo-Futurist, I forget what his name is. It's John something, I believe, right? John Arcto, I think is his pseudonym. Obviously not his real name. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to he's trying to subtract away principles from Western civilization in order to cut out wokeness. The problem is that wokeness is not generated by some element in Western civilization. It's generated by an absence in Western civilization. That absence is the religious core. You cannot subtract your way out of our problem with civilizational decline any more than you can dig down out of a hole, except in the most hypothetical sense where you dig straight through the center of the earth. There has to be an upward motion where you put solid substance underneath your feet, which means necessarily establishing a moral core. Ideas always have a moral core, and politics always has a moral core. That's what it's needed to be substantive. This is why the pool boy nihilism never goes anywhere. Pool boy, and there was that whole video. I'm pretty sure life doesn't have a meaning. This like soy boy in a pool doing this little Ben Folds jam about Rick and Morty nihilism and how we can all just do what we want. No one believes this anymore because everyone knows now that people preaching nihilism just want to use their own morality that's usually part of the status quo. Because all politics, in order to be substantive, has to have a center to it. Switching the slides. Politics has to be what you are, or politics has to be brotherhood. This is something that I've thought a lot more about after coming back from the OGC conference. There's an absolute necessity to keep the basket weaving efforts of general community building apart and separated from the fraternity building that is a necessary secondary component to it. When the OGC first started, I will confess that I said, this is a great idea, but it's a few years too early. And I said that because I had my own idea like this called the Canon Society that was like 5 years too early, right? And I thought the OGC is probably a few years too early to do this. Well, I think if I had my druthers and I was using my instinct, this would be right around the time I would just starting your fraternal organizations. People are starting to become ready for this. Politics is about what you are. Politics is about brotherhood. And I say brotherhood because it really has to be about men or about people who are or women who are functionally acting as men when they think about politics. Women kings. You are an honorary man while you're thinking about politics. And then you can go back to being a woman, right? But real politics doesn't have that kind of home math line-esque called who's going to win, who's going to win, who's going to win. I want to be on the winning side. I want who's going to... No, that's not how you do real politics. Real politics is believing what's right and fighting for it, not describing what's popular in some extemporaneous way, so that when the battle dust is cleared, you can sing a lament to the side that lost, which you did nothing to help, or actively demoralized by spreading propaganda that declared the cause to be lost before it was actually lost. Politics is about people who are invested in a certain principle and a certain people. One of the points on the dissident scale of ideas that I mentioned, politics is about a particular place and people, even if the principles are universal. Its application is always particular. And politics has to be about who you are loyal to and the ideas you actually believe enough to carry forward and handle responsibly. And for this reason, we are ready to kind of take the next step. I'm not going to talk about the OGC conference today because I'm talking about it tomorrow. You can do a double Dave live stream. It'll probably detract from the popularity of this live stream, but it is what it is. Fraternities are probably the place where a lot of people are thinking. And by fraternities, I don't mean getting drunk with your buddies. I mean groups of mostly men, if not exclusively men, who get together and pour their efforts towards the application of politics and political effort in one specific direction. This is a broader category, or not broader. This is a subset of a broader category that I call aspirational organizations. This is my great lesson from basket weaving this year. Basket weaving needs to be about doing, aside from just meeting up once with the barmaids, which are just, you have to do them because you're kind of filtering out the weirdos. Let's not lie about that, right? So you have to have like these low investment meetups where you talk about the same 5 conversations we always talk about every time. But the point of basket weaving has to be to build towards events that you should be doing as an adult. Dinners where you have speakers and maybe music, classical music concerts, charity organizations, maybe actually performing actionable charity inside your community, pursuing arts, doing the things that adults used to do and carrying on their practices into the future. That's the point of basket weaving. Well, okay, the point of basket weaving is to be a seedbed to create these aspirational organizations. Some of these aspirational organizations are fraternities doing politics and mostly comprised of men. or mostly comprising men, to use comprising properly. Some of them will be preservation societies or conservatory societies, which would be certainly much more open to women, which is actually, that's kind of women's wheelhouse, is doing that kind of thing. But they were always and always aspirational. That is the key part of them, and that's what makes them real, because it is in the things that we believe in and aspire towards that links us together in actual investment. This brings us to things like the Old Glory Club, and part of my speech there, which having a very kind of meandering intro and icebreaker, was largely about how we get to this point. The point, and I'm going to summarize my own speech, well, at least my concluding paragraph. The point of politics is to recapture the human technology and to bring them forward into the world with a certain amount of humor and comedic sense. It's to make the good things as easy for people to do and the bad things as hard for people to do as possible. When we have banquets where we have speakers, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. If you wanted to invite your grandmother or your boss to one of these events, it should be completely easy to do that. And he'll hear a new idea, but it will not be threatening at all. I need to work on that, because we need to work on our vetting process a little bit, because some people are bringing speeches to these events that are a little too spicy, but that's the aspiration, right? You're making it easy for people to do good. You're making it pleasant for people to enjoy it. That's what mangle this. Was it not Aristotle that said that the purpose of education is to make people love the good and hate the evil? That is the point of all of these aspirational organizations. The fraternity is supposed to make people love loyalty. That's the utility of getting around and drinking a beer with your friends, while hopefully plotting. Many a treason was plotted over libations, as the Irish used to say, or it was plotted at a pub. And the same thing is true there. While organizing yourself politically for that which you care about locally and particularly, the camaraderie and the good feeling and the cheer is there to educate, to help you love the good and hate the evil. That's the point of organization. That's the point of doing real politics. And that's what we have to be aware of also when we do the artistic thing like Walt Bismarck and we explore crazy ideas. I think we have a responsibility to come back and say, okay, this was a crazy idea, but don't do this. Don't ruin your life trying to be the elite slutty woman who sleeps with everyone at the salon. That is a bad strategy, right? We're exploring it as an artistic endeavor, but part of your responsibility as an artist is to keep your community from doing crazy things like ODing on opium. or killing themselves, which is frequently a bad thing among artistic communities. You can become so open-minded you literally kill yourself. In fact, that's mostly what's going on in our society. You have a responsibility as an artist to separate the wheat from the chaff and to make sure that people, especially people who aren't able to handle the great irony of art, that they find their way back to the good and true and beautiful ideas that won't ruin their lives. It's your responsibility to do that. It's your responsibility when you write articles about, people's marriages failing, just to pick a random example out of my hat. You want to make sure that you're communicating the fact that the greater purpose is to develop healthy family life. It is to develop good habits. Because if you don't, and if you're exploring the crisis of modernity, you need to treat the people who are trying to fix the problems a little bit differently than people who are describing the disaster. Otherwise, you're moving yourself into that position where all I want to be is like Nero. I know this comes from Tacitus, and it was also famously displayed in Quo Vadis, right? Nero crying over the city that he himself helped burn down, right? Because he wanted to be dramatic. Oh, woe is the city; it's been burned. The responsible way to describe a disaster is to separate out your treatment of people who are trying to come up with solutions and put forward solutions differently from people who are just kind of joining the party, so to speak, and enjoying the decline. These things have to be separated. Otherwise, we're not doing our jobs. We're not doing our politics in real ways. We're doing them in this fake 20th century way where journalism can be completely abstracted from the struggle itself. We're like those people who watched battles during the 19th century, right? Well, in the 19th century, you could watch battles like that if you were an old man or women because there was an understanding that there were rules to war. You couldn't watch battles in the Dark Ages. And as we move into the 20th century, the rules for mimetic warfare are going to become similar to the rules of actual warfare in the 8th century. There's going to be increasingly few ways that you can do this in a non-combatant role effectively. Now, all that is to say, don't bias your coverage. Don't lie to me to flatter me. Tell me the truth. Give me the truth, warts and all. But also, some recognition is needed for what's being attempted in order not to kind of be caught up on the wrong side of things. That I don't see any way around this. A great article that came out from the Exit Group, which was unfortunately, I think, private. This is another thing that we're not talking about, but this needs to be part of the conversation. Just as our aspirational organizations are going to be there in order to make the righteous things good for each other, we have to also make bad things and unhealthy things anathema to each other. We have to discourage unhealthy behaviors. The example that Kevin Dolan used in his Exit newsletter is the Palantir. The Palantir allows Denethor to see Sauron's mind. Unlike Saruman, he's not completely corrupted. But what Sauron does is he allows Denethor to see he basically blackpills Denethor. He allows Denethor to see the truth and see all of the worst things, and to make it seem like Sauron's power was completely unopposable and that all was lost, and all he could do is kind of like wait for Minas Tirith to burn to the ground and maybe burn his own son on the funeral pyre. Again, like the people who are watching the battle so they can cry in the ashes about the futility of the struggle. We in our organizations have to fight back against this urge in ourselves and in each other. One of the great utilities in the conference, the OGC conference, was everyone kept their phones in their room. I kind of didn't because I needed to check in on my wife and my family. So I was constantly checking the time on my phone, but I kept it in my pocket almost all of the time. I was not scrolling Twitter at all, except as we went back to the hotel room. And this was an amazing thing because you realize that after 3 days of doing this, of course, you're in a conference and you have a conference high. You're also having a high because you're not constantly blackpilling yourself going through Twitter. That's a huge utility to yourself. And suddenly you feel like you're more agentic. You're more able to do your work. You're more able to focus on creating content and what matters. And that's a utility that we all have to cultivate amongst each other. It's really amazing in the conference, and I'll say this as my closing remark and kind of as you might imagine, the ending piece thought of this live stream. One thing I wanted to say is, in addition to cultivating in addition to eschewing the bad, the spirit we want to embrace is that of the troubadour. What does the troubadour do? The troubadour goes and he takes songs to his people so that he can make the memory of the past and the best lessons of the past, the ones that people remember in times of goodness. So you will remember what we say, what we talk about when we talk about the hard lessons of politics. You will remember that as a lesson going forward because you will hear with it the songs and camaraderie that we hold with each other. And that's something that I very much took from the conference. You know, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. A spoonful of sanity and good cheer and hospitality and kindness and openness, mixed with perhaps some light criticism for improvement. That is the way that people actually communicate and internalize good things. Just as encouraging people to put away vices is a necessary part of that struggle, including and especially information hazard vices. the thing that the OGC conference taught me is just the utility of ordinary men in community with each other. Just wanting the things that men want. Wanting a future for their children. Wanting families. Wanting the aspirations of a world that they can feel proud of. And a world that looks beautiful for the safety and well-being of women. You put ordinary people, ordinary men, in a dinner together, and you sit them down talking to those ends with that moral framework and encouraged and taught with those lessons. I mean, I'm an Italian elite theorist. I believe in the Pareto principle. But you get just a few ordinary men with ordinary level IQs together, you're talking about a spiritual elite, because you're tapping into that moment, something that so few people have in our generation. The ability to get together and think seriously about the future, and to take ownership over the future, and to take ownership over each other, and to say, let's build together, let's fight together. Let's be true to each other. My political credibility, and I think I said something like this before. My political credibility is intimately bound to the life outcomes of my family and my friends in real life, but also the life outcomes of the people that I broke bread with at the OGC conference, and that I will break bread with at future OGC conferences and future Beowulf conferences. Because the utility of my politics is to deliver good life outcomes to those ordinary men and those extraordinary men who stand together. My politics is nothing, and you should not listen to me if those are failures. And although I cannot foresee, obviously the federal government comes in and shoots all of us, right? Then I guess I'm not responsible for that, right? So don't hold me to that. But insofar as any of my actions or any of my mistakes lead to the downfall of one of those men or their families or their futures, then my politics should be taken less seriously, and I should be held to account for that. I am online for that. And obviously I'm human. I make mistakes. I'm adult. My wife will tell you that I'm adult many more times than I should be. And God knows that I make mistakes, but I endeavor here never to put myself in a position where I'm ready to be a doomsayer, where I'm saying we're doomed, and I'm looking forward to that because I'm sitting back and watching and going, yes, these will be ashes that I can cry over, and my role is to cry over the ashes. If my community goes down in ashes, then I will be ashes as well, because I am part of a community, because man is only man inside community. And insofar as he is isolated and absconded himself into hermetically sealed boxes where he is not fighting for the cause, but merely observing it, he's no longer a political actor, and it's kind of in that mode become something less of a man, even if he retains his humanity. And I think we should aspire to be men, to be ordinary men or extraordinary men. And with that, guys, I will close this lecture portion, and I'll see you in probably 5 minutes for the remaining entropy questions. The chat is in the high bar. The chat's pinned. I'll see you in a few. Okay, guys, I'm cutting this short because my lectures have been going long recently, and as such, I digress a lot, as you guys know. As such, I cannot wait a long time for super chats. We just have to go through them, and unfortunately, we'll probably be going through them a little faster than I would like because. But let's just get ahead and do this. My lectures have been going long recently. And all the way to the bottom because I think that's how I digress a lot. Entropy works. Well, there's a lot of them. As tonight. Such, okay, I cannot. Awesome. All right, cannot. Bright Dawn for $10 USA. As a follow-up to Fiddler's Green Podcast 48. Caesar had a lot of perks due to power, but when things got gritty, he led from the front and bore misery with his men. Leadership inherently has its perks, but it should be its own reward. A leader would lead me, even if that led him to water and bread, not a palace. Bright Dawn for $10 USA. Fair enough. As I mean, this is the Fiddler's Green Podcast. I endorse that sentiment. I think that was actually very similar to the sentiment I just ended the podcast with. He led from the front and bore misery with his men. The point of leadership is a kind of radical ownership for the people who are with leader would lead me, even if in particularity. And I feel that everything we've done, even in the modern world, has confused this, not a palace. Bright Dawn for $10 USA. Fair enough. This is one of the problems I end up with in these organizing events is you're like, every year our organization efforts grow significantly. But every year, I think to myself, this is good, but we need to really increase by an order of magnitude before things really get started. In particularity. Right now, everything we've done in America and the problem we're dealing with is that people need to drive. And this is a little bit extemporaneous. This is one of the problems. And the problem is that when people need to drive, it's only coming out every year our organization. And what we really want to have every year is less thinking myself driving. This is good. More people, meaning friends that they can do things with in their local communities. Everything we've done after we have we're dealing with is because people need to drive. That is the ultimate goal, is to have friends and people and the problem is that when people locally drive, who know and potentially you could start individual projects with, and then build into years less thinking myself driving. This is good. More people. Okay. Meaning thank you very much, Bright Dawn. I'm going to go on. I'll do this a little bit faster than I usually do. Bright Dawn for another $10 USA. We have follow-up response you gave to Asteroid Assassin. The goal is to have friends. And if women fear men, why are abusive things like 50 Shades of Grey so powerful potential male minds? I hope I didn't mess up by mentioning such a book to a man who is trying to live a Christian life, but it has been boggling my mind. Well, and this is really obvious. Women don't like. Right on for another $10 USA. Okay, so this is the thing. Like, women have response you gave to Asteroid Assassin, but they don't actually have rape fantasies. If women fear men, why are audio? My audio out. Powerful potential male minds. I hope I didn't mess up. Okay, let's do this again. But it is. Someone's telling me my audio is bad. Is that bad? It's really obvious. Okay. Women don't like. Right on for another $10 USA. Okay, so this is the thing. Like, women have response you gave to Asteroid Assassin, but they don't actually have rape fantasies. Hello, guys. Can you hear me now? Why are audio? My audio. I'm gonna wait a few minutes here. Let's do this, and I'm gonna reread those super chats. Someone's telling me my audio is false start, guys. We're gonna start from the beginning again as soon as I women get this. Is this not echoing anymore? Okay, so this is the thing. Like, women have. I see what's going on, but they don't actually have rape fantasies. Hello, guys. Okay, perfect. I found it. Okay, there we go. So there was a window. When I opened up Entropy, it started playing the audio live. So this should now be properly synced. Can people hear me? I'm going to assume that this is good now, and I'm going to reread the super chats. I apologize for the... Okay, I think this is fixed now. Okay, good to go. Okay. Perfect. Let's start over. Should I rerun the intermission, guys? This will be all cut out of the final podcast. Usually when I'm really behind in uploading the audio versions, but I always upload the audio to my Substack. I think it's for paid subscribers only. So the plebs who don't pay for it, they get to hear me make the mistakes and redo this again. So I will reread the things again. So Bright Dawn says for $10 as a follow-up to Fiddler Green Podcast 48, Caesar had a lot of perks due to power, but when things got gritty, he led from the front and bore misery with his men. Leadership inherently has its perks, but it should be its own reward. A leader would leave me even if I led him to water. And not a palace. So I said, yes, this is very much in keeping with my statements about brotherhood and about the purpose of leadership that I talked about in the original talk. And this is something that you see again. The purpose of leadership is brotherhood and seeing our interests as sort of unified in one. The next super chat that was in the process of answering. Follow up to a response you gave Asteroidal Assassin on Fiddler's Green podcast number 48. If women fear men, why are abusive things like 50 Shades of Grey so powerful on the female mind? I hope I did not mess up by mentioning such a book to a man who's trying to live a Christian life, but it has been boggling my mind. Probably lost 100 people there. So this was what I was launching in on. Okay, guys, female psychology is not that hard. Women say, I have rape fantasies. Rape is sexy. Violence is sexy. Rape is not actually sexy. Rape is not sexy. Like real rape we're talking about. There's nothing in the entire world that is less sexy than rape. And you know, real women know this. What women like is they like force. They like force and they like fake violence. They like force and they like power. And the only way that you can have power, you can show that you have power, is to use force. And then the best way you use force is to use fake violence. So they like sex with force and fake violence. And that's what this 50 Shades of Grey is. They want the man to have power, so they have to pretend that there is some kind of rape scenario because we've lied to ourselves for such a long time in the 20th century. And because of feminism, the only way that we can conceptualize rape or conceptualize men with power is through these fantasies of violence. And it's just, it's kind of silly and it's kind of fucked up, but this is what we're dealing with. And I mentioned this podcaster, the home math thing. He does this drawing engineering diagrams of why women like violence is something that he would do a very good job of. And I think he has in the past. It's because we're so limbically oriented in this. It's immediate stimulus. What is the female sexual drive immediately key into? Power. What's the most immediate way of experiencing power? Force. What's the most immediate way of experiencing force? Violence. And because we're so short-circuited, women aren't taught to appreciate this in a more sophisticated way. The only way they can experience it is like in these little 3-second bursts. And because of that, they have to have this simulated fake shit, the way that men only can now get off to like this simulated fake porn shit. It's the pornographication of a healthy female instinct to want a man who's powerful and strong and who can protect her. But because our limbic systems are short-circuited, the only way we can experience this properly is through conceptualizing it as some form of violence. And that's what gives way to the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. Okay, Lee's Scoot for $5 USA. Is my audio good now? Hopefully there's no objections. No one is complaining too much. Okay, good. Lee's Scoot for $5 USA. Good evening, Dave. Sorry to bring up internet drama, but given the recent controversy with Rakita, a trad dad turning out to be a degenerate, do you feel that this supports your idea of a castle needing a latrine in a way? I have known nothing about Rakita. Was somebody who covered the Trump thing. He was like a lawyer. This is another one of those people like Lauren Southern, right? Like, was Rakita a trad person? Like, I never really watched him. Was that his thing? he was a trad influencer. that's the I think this is sort of retroactive. I never knew him as that. Look, guys, as for the reference to the castle and the latrine, I believe as a reference to Aquinas's commentary that prostitution was like a castle latrine. It's absolutely filthy and degenerate, but a castle needs one, otherwise it starts to stink. Look, guys, the thing with this degeneracy thing is it needs to be private. In the modern internet age and with modern comforts, I don't know why I can't demand a castle that doesn't have a latrine. Do I have my moments of weakness? I'm not saying I don't, obviously. The problem always comes down to things like thirst traps online. And it's very hard to stop looking at them, especially when pornography is confused so often with things like, the Conan the Barbarian illustrations. And if you have collections of fantasy illustrations, it can lapse into the stuff very easily, right? So I have to constantly be on guard myself, and, we have to guard ourselves against falling. And I'm not a perfect man, obviously. But I'm not so sure why I can't publicly just demand that people be held to the highest possible standard publicly. And if there are failings, and if I need to accept failings, I only want to accept them privately. I don't want to entertain this. We have to be okay with guys and women sleeping around because that's what elite men and women have always done because they're elite. Like, I'll accept that as like an art project from Walt Bismarck, but it's not a serious intellectual position that I want to embrace inside a public movement. Because, okay, sure, you're elite and you can cheat and have promiscuity, and I guess I can't come after you because you're so politically powerful. But you know how you could be even more elite? You could be an elite political operator and not create a huge public problem for me. That would be even more elite. So I have no problem with, I guess I would say I'll accept a latrine in the castle. But in this age of social media, I don't see why we can't shoot for the moon, so to speak, and then deal with people's individual degeneracy as it comes up. Always, hopefully, with forgiveness. I always want to make sure that forgiveness is always a part of this. And, and allowances for weaknesses need to be made. But I don't see why we can't aspire to just following our own rules. I mean, in Rakita's case, wasn't he actually doing drugs like cocaine? I mean, like, I don't see why a 100% non-cocaine using elite could not be a reality for us. Like, leaders that are not doing drugs. I mean, is my standards too high? I don't think so. I mean, don't be Keffels. Don't be Keffels seems like not a high standard. No, look, like if Rakita gets clean and comes to Jesus, I will be very fast to forgive him. And I never even watched him. So for all I know, I would hate his content if I watched it. But, if this guy comes clean, comes to Jesus, immediate forgiveness, unless we have reason to believe that he'll double cross us, that is, if he's famous for something else, right? Good evening, Dave. Oh, that's the drama thing. Okay. Wolfbane for $20 USA. Hi, Dr. Green. Dr. Green. I guess I am Dr. Green. I prefer Mr. Green because it's like the Clue character, right? I realize now that in addition to being Bidler's Green from Sandman, and a reference to Graham Greene, the mid-20th century Catholic author who wrote The Third Man, this also could be a reference to Gene Wolfe's The Green Man, who is a mystery Gnostic character from the last novel of the New Sun trilogy. But Dr. Green, okay, I do have a PhD, but just call me Mr. Or call me Dave. Hi, Dr. Green. I've heard about have you heard about the Korriban Society? I absolutely have not. They are a new group applying Italian elite theory, IRL, and discussing philosophical, literary, and cultural real-world topics on YouTube through fun SW Jaijiku Lovecraftian lens. They admire people like you and Aaron a lot. Could you give them a shout out? Well, that sounds awesome. Check out the Korriban Society. Daikaiju, that's anime, right? I mean, I kind of like anime, but I kind of hate it. I haven't watched it for ages, but I hate what anime has become. But I like the idea that we could use some anime aesthetics to sparingly make mature points. I just really don't like men choosing it as avatars, because I think men should choose as avatars and aspirations the men they want to become and the men they want to be seen as by other men. And believe me, if you aspire to be a man and try to build yourself into that man, like, the real women will come. If you're single, hopefully. In my own case, I want women to stay away since I am married very happily. But I don't like the orbiting subculture. But this sounds like an awesome thing. Please check out the Korriban Society. I guess I can't personally endorse them since I haven't seen them, but I'll try to subscribe after when I get a chance. Bolero393 for $5 USA. Dave, thanks for setting up the New Jersey Weave. I really enjoyed your speech on Sunday as well per usual. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I guess I did meet you there. I always have a hard time corresponding the faces to the super chatters. Yeah, the speeches. Prude has a much better delivery style than I do. I have this problem where I half read it and half deliver it. So, and I always do a little stumbling when I come from a section that I deliver, just because I have it memorized to a point where I'm reading. And Bagby had a perfectly read speech, George Bagby, and Prudentialist had a perfectly delivered in the moment speech. And on the other hand, I had a speech where I half did each, and I felt like you could literally see the points where I started and stopped reading, and that was a little disruptive to the audience, but I thought it went pretty well. You always find a way to marry logos to pathos. You should remember that truth, beauty, and goodness are on our side. Take heart and rebuild culture. Yes, we will rebuild, and we are rebuilding. The only question is how small what we're going to rebuild is. And right now it's a little bit small, right? But at least I have no doubt that people will carry forward a nucleus of what we love and value in this world. The only question is how small that nucleus is going to be in the new world, and how long it will wait to be reseated in something new. And the more things, it's like grabbing things off a sinking ship. The more things that you can grab, the more things that you can organize, the tighter knit communities you can build, and the broader you can network them together, the stronger this thing that we have with each other is going to be in the future. Sydney for $5 USA. Hey Dave, catching up on you with right-wing art production. I finished the demo of my game Clash of Melodies, which is now out to play for free. Got a good reception so far. Unfortunately, the fundraiser for the full game has been going terribly. Well, where is the fundraiser? Is it on Kickstarter? I can give a shout out. I guess you should search for Clash of Melodies on Kickstarter. Cindy, one of our guys here, a regular super chatter, is doing this. And I highly recommend supporting this. I really love Jay Burden, who says he always puts 100% of the money he earns online back into supporting other people online. My family expenses are a little too high for me to do that. So, but I really aspire to put more of the money I earn online into more of these artistic products. But thank you very much, Sydney. Soup Noodle for $75. Wow, thank you very much. It's a very generous super chat, or super entropy. No question, I usually miss these streams live. Just wanted to send you something for the countless hours of thought you have gifted us. Wishing you all the best from down under. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, we know more people who are operating in the Melbourne area to organize basque weaving down there. I know that the Franklin has his own thing, and I know he doesn't like hanging out with Well, I think he does hang out sometimes with the young men in their 20s, but I think he's in a position in his life where he's doing his own thing. But I think, the Australian thing would be a good thing to develop much, much more, because I think we need more strong people down under. So thank you very much for the organization that you're doing and helping out with that project. I actually met with somebody, an Australian at the basket weaving event in Nashville, and we had a great conversation about that. I really hope we can get it going. I always like to make fun of Australians. Australians have they also have a problem with the hard R when they say Melbourne, right? They say it without the hard R. The hard R needs to be deployed to Melbourne in Australia. I'll say that. Sam153 for $50 USA. I hope you have a great time in the OGC conference. I hope you had a great time at the OGC conference. Thank you for your clarity as always. One day I will mosey down from Canada to attend. P.S. Stop debating leftist corn stalks. It's part of my job never to turn down challenges. But yeah, good Lord, that Jake guy was absolutely beyond the pale. That was just him insulting me for 2 hours and then eventually moving on to insult my wife and kid. That was absolutely beyond the pale. And that guy does not deserve the time of day. But you do need to understand how left-wingers are thinking. That is absolutely essential. The intellectual part of the left, including people like Freddie DeBoer, are trying to find ways to back out of their commitments to the insanity that is left-wing ideology. This is an opportunity for us. Dialectic right now is always an opportunity for us. That's why the only people who actually want to engage publicly in debate are the people who are dressed as crazy corn people. But thank you very much, Sam153. Eric Lefebvre for USA $15. Black pill, this is exhausting. My parish is 140 in a vaulted Gothic sanctuary that seats 800. The congregation just decided to remove 10 pews and tear down the walls between the narthex and the sanctuary to make more space for boomers to drink coffee. The hand-carved woodwork dates back to 1926. Yeah, this is the dead elephant problem, right? This is the problem that the boomer generation is this giant dead elephant, and we have to carry this to the elephant graveyard before we can get on with what we need to do. I wouldn't sweat it very much. But this is one problem why religious communities, as much as I think that they will need to be a bigger thing in the future, the thing that makes them so difficult right now is that if you go to any kind of Christian congregation, the young people there are going to be overwhelmed by the old people. And even if the old people are really, really based, which oftentimes they're not, even if old people are really, really based, the problem is that their needs are going to slowly start dominating the parish. And what young people need is they need dynamic organizations of other young people who can move and expand quickly and who can confront what's actually going on in the world as it is. And the boomers are not going to want to do that. That's scary. So for the time being, I think that most of us are going to have to organize hybrid. Youth organizations inside churches and also youth organizations on the outside of churches, and then networking those two things together, and then helping the old as we can in moderation. But we can't be like 5 young people offering the services that young people, 5 young people offering services to 200 old people in the same way that young people used to offer services to the old in the time of the church when it was like 200 young people helping out 40 old people. That can't happen. We have to adjust expectations. We can't make churches just revolve around the old until they eventually die. And I would reach out to the old to respect that. We want to respect our elders and help them. We also have to negotiate that with our responsibility for the future. And our responsibility for the future of this church means creating spaces to bring in young people and to do things that only young people can do, and to use a significant amount of the church's resources to accomplish those ends. I don't see any way around that. Nerve AMV Maker for USA $20. Welcome back. Do you find yourself naturally drawn to your ancestral culture? I've done a lot of reading and find that the English and German works of literature are the ones I'm continually drawn to and get something out of. There's a distance in the great work of Russia, Japan, and France that keeps me at arm's length. Well, Nerve AMV Maker, I hate to say this, but I not really. I mean, my strongest ethnic composition is German. Now, I took a few years of German, and I spoke a little bit with my grandmother on the phone, and it was always very weak. And I've lost it all now. So it's gone. But I've always been somebody who's been very attracted to certain cultures outside of my own. Although I do have a lot of genetics from the British Isles, my number one cultural affinity is for places like Scotland and Ireland, and then to lesser extent the Anglo-Saxon culture of England. But I mean, obviously to a great extent the Anglo-Saxon culture of England. But it's very hard to disaggregate that from just because everyone is in America, right? Because that's just the mother culture. I speak English, so of course I'm influenced by WASP culture. But I've had an affinity for Celtic British Isles culture, and for German culture too, to an extent. Like, I'm a huge fan of Carlyle. I'm rereading Sardis for the second time, and that's a hard book to read. And of course, Carlyle was a Scotsman who was a big Teutonophile, or a Germanophile, as we Americans say. And this is something that my brain's melting. I feel like I'm kind of reconnecting with that a little bit. I always struggled with Goethe, who I've read, and I felt like I've never really appreciated to the extent that I should have. Obviously, I love German classical music, so there's that. But everyone does, again, right? But, German culture has always been a little bit difficult for me. Even though I have done extensive research into my family history, largely at the behest of my father, who could very much use your prayers right now. I'd like to offer up, if you could pray for my father, I would really appreciate that. As he's ill. I do like German culture. I do like elements of German culture, but I feel always that there's something I'm not getting about it, right? There's something I'm not getting about it. I'm not understanding something critical about German culture. I guess the romantic area of German culture definitely speaks to me. But then again, like there's this enormous clutter inside German culture, and this enormous confusion inside German culture, and this enormous insecurity inside German culture that I just don't understand. And maybe I'll never understand it, even though it is my genetic heritage. And obviously I really do love Japan, and I've always felt a huge cultural affinity for The Five Rings was a work that was very influential on me as a young man, and just a lot of stuff a lot of cultural works that came out of that. So I guess I don't like, and obviously the Japanese were great Teutonophiles as well. So maybe I'm absorbing the secrets of German culture secondhand. You could say that, right? Eric Lafar for the $3 USA. Once and Future King sucks. It is worse than Great Expectations, and it's degenerate liberalism. Ah, come on. I totally agree that White was a progressive of his time, but isn't it kind of it's not kind of fun? I mean, I know it's kind of subversive. I know that White was trying to be a little bit subversive, but it's been ages since I've read that book. I read that book in high school. And when I read that book in high school, I felt like it was just a fun rendition of King Arthur, and one that made the characters seem more human and more modern. And I did not read it like a subversion. Maybe I would have read it as a subversion if I was as old as I was when I read The Mists of Avalon. All right. Saffron Park for $25 USA. Hi, Dave. Trying to Basque Weave by organizing a Western Canon book club in Central New York area. Any advice for just starting this out? I printed posters and handed them out at local libraries and set up a website, greatbooks.cna.com, and talked to people at the church. Do you know any other avenues I should be looking into this? I don't know. Sometimes there are like Nextdoor. I was able to start up book groups back in the day. This would be 10 years ago. But I was able, 10 years ago, just at the beginning of the Great Awakening, a lot of these local organization apps, back then it was like Craigslist and Facebook, but now it would be like Nextdoor and WhatsApp. There were people who liked reading great books in those places, and you could find them. But I would try. I would say maybe try that. Maybe it could work, right? There are organizations that read great books on Facebook, and Facebook's obviously a dinosaur. It's legacy software at this stage. But I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't find people who are using those apps. But at this stage, our Basque weaving is not thick enough to do a weekly thing. You might be able to do like a monthly book meetup group. Like, I think I could pull that off. Of course, I also am an influencer, so the weaves I organize are going to be a little bit more successful. But if you had somebody in the area who might be willing to help out with that, who is an influencer, I would reach out to influencers in New York. I would check the Facebook and WhatsApp and the boomer apps, that you might get some hits there. And all you need is sort of an initial groundwork, and then also be accommodating. This is post-COVID. You might get a lot of people who want to make it online. And I would say, like, you could also try to do this. Like, let's have bi-weekly meetings and do one online meeting via whatever people use, Discord, Zoom, whatever. One online meeting and then one bar meetup with dinner. And that might work out really, really well to get people who are kind of still hiding away from the COVID world to kind of break their shell and come out. And you might meet some base people in the process of doing that. Always keep your antenna open for people who might be sympathetic. Society Man, $15 USA. Jon Stewart coming back to The Daily Show seemed for a few seconds like it might be somehow Jon Stewart coming back to The Daily Show seemed for a few seconds like it might somehow revive the old narrative power of the 2000 left. But after seeing a few shrill clips floating around in the first few weeks of his return, it already seems like they have been forgotten. Humor is not an easy beast to tame. No, and Jon Stewart is a gift at this stage because his presence on The Daily Show just reminds everyone of how completely out of ideas the left is. The left has two options. It can go full woke, which everyone knows is crazy now. Everyone really knows that this is crazy. You can walk outside and I guess Jon Stewart is, oh my God, crime and destitution and defecation in the subways is literally the definition of freedom. That's how we know we're free, because we step in human excrement when we go on the subway. That's how we know we're free, because we're unsafe in our own homes. That's a joke. That's a joke. And every intellectually serious person knows that it's a joke, and they know that it's pandering. And you're either in the group that wants to be pandered to because they're in a little video game hug box in a leftist Discord server, waiting for more edutainment, or you're a serious person on the intellectual left and you're thinking right now, how can we possibly separate and create something that's authentic, that we can call genuinely leftists? Thank you, Society Man. I'm glad to see you here, though. Nervan V Maker for $10 USA. The morals of Once and Future King are left-wing, but the cause of the kingdom's collapse is reactionary. It's an interesting book in which a left-winger honestly dramatizes the collapse of a left-wing utopia. Also, Dickens is the greatest writer in English language. Start with A Tale of Two Cities. I mean, in both cases, it's kind of a little bit of the same thing, right? I mean, Dickens was, I don't know if the label really applies to him, but he was kind of a progressive of his time. But he's based because he grew up in a based culture. He grew up in a culture that forced him to confront reality. And reality has a well-known right-wing bias to it. That's just how things work. It also didn't hurt that one of Dickens' major influences, especially for A Tale of Two Cities, is, drum roll please, Thomas Carlyle's The French Revolution. So when you're reading A Tale of Two Cities, you are essentially imbibing reactionary ideas in Carlyle. And this is what's so great about progressive authors up into the 70s is that they are literally holding ideas in dialectic. They are letting concepts, right-wing ideas, fight it out with left-wing ideas in a very organic way inside their own work, and in a way that the authors themselves don't even really fully understand. They're letting ideas struggle against each other. And that's, people ask me again, why I feel like a broken record, but I'll repeat this again. People ask me, why do I do debates? Why do I like debates? I like to watch ideas and personalities struggle against each other, because it's only in the struggle that you really know how your idea works. And just because your idea loses a debate doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad idea. There are tons of ideas that do terrible in debates. I mean, just think about the new atheist movement. I mean, any complicated idea that discusses an esoteric topic in a nuanced way will suck in a debate. But they can contain great wisdom. But you need to know, when you hold some of these nuanced esoteric ideas, that those esoteric ideas do not necessarily hold up in a debate. You need to know what you have, right? Rotten Mate for $15 USA. Get our mic, bitter mic nerd. Hope the kid is well. Well, thank you very much. Is my mic that bad? I mean, I will get a better mic, but I think it's perfectly fine, right? I mean, aside from that problem with the feedback from Entropy. Okay. Thank you very much, Rotten Meat. Augustine Bonhoeffer for $20 USA. Fixed, see above, cheers, man. Well, thank you very much. I guess they're complaining about the microphone, but thank you. Chicken Yiddle for $50 USA. Good evening, Dave. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to share your wisdom. Well, actually, I always love doing this stuff. The only thing that I oftentimes don't do live streams because I'm busy with family, which always comes first, or work, which also comes first because I need it to support my family. Or alternatively, the third thing that comes before these live streams is writing the Substack, which I believe it's a more permanent thing. So I try to put more investment in that. So, and I'll try to get the Substack essays into video essay format at some point. I've had some volunteers. One was Luke Avery from Lambda Bible Studies, who did an excellent rendition of the Data Made Us Do It, which I really enjoyed. Anyway, thank you very much. But I love doing these things, so it's no skin off my nose. Although I do appreciate the super chats because that helps. it really helps make this make sense to my wife, right? Because as a married man, you're always like, oh, hey, honey, I have to go talk into the computer for 3 hours, so I guess I won't be seeing you tonight. The money helps with that. And I am trad in the my wife gets to spend the money thing. It never ceases to annoy me how Christian leaders will consistently neglect orthodoxy to appeal to potential converts on the left who reject basic Christian moral principles. Do they do this to be perceived as high class, or is something else driving this? Okay, there's two things driving it. The first thing is you've correctly perceived progressives are powerful. Therefore, if you have progressive converts, you are by definition higher class and your religion is elevated. The second thing is, nostalgia. This is, you know, I guess I'll just dox myself a little bit here. I mean, everyone's picked this up from my work. Is I live in Princeton, New Jersey. I wasn't born here. I have no knowledge of this place or even the history of Princeton, and I've done my damnedest to stay away from that accursed college, despite the fact that, you know, my church is next to it. But the thing is that you talk to the priests, and what do they talk about? You know, the older ones. Well, they talk about the good old days when all the university professors were Catholic, right? And then as a priest, when you got up there and you gave your homily in the 1960s and 70s, you'd have a huge percentage of the Princeton faculty listen to you. And they don't say that explicitly, right? They don't say that explicitly, but that you can hear, oh my God, Princeton, look at all of the fancy cars that our congregants have. They're all driving Mercedes or whatever. I don't actually live I live out on the outskirts where the plebeians live, right? Not in the town proper where all the rich professors live. Now, you know, in the 2000s, which Princeton professors are, you know, how many are there? There's Robert P. George, maybe a few others, right? I mean, they miss that. They miss being part of the community. They miss being integrated. In the world of the 1960s, being a priest was an ordinary thing. And being a priest in the modern world is being kind of a weirdo. They miss that. And they have every right to miss that. And they say that their path back to that good place is getting progressive converts. That's why they want it. And I don't blame them. They want progressive converts for the same reason that I want to live in the 90s. I know you can't live in the 90s. I say that constantly, but I still want it. I still want to raise my son in the 90s. Of course I want that. It was better back then. It's nostalgia. Nerve AMV Maker for $5 USA. I can't stand the Constitution Sims. Oh yeah, Eric Erickson's. We live in a limited government country. No, you don't. You have not. You have never lived. Eric Erickson has never lived in an America of limited government. You know, my mother and my father. Well, my father wasn't born in this country, but you know, they never lived in a limited government. The limited government in America died with the New Deal. It conceptually died at the end of the Civil War. I can't stand the Constitution Sims. Even says Nerve AMV Maker. Even the founders believed that if everything went perfect, the Constitution would only last until the majority of the population was located in cities. They didn't believe their system was immortal. Yeah, I get again, right? It's like what Uncle Yarv says. If the founding fathers could see America of the 21st century, they would say these people are completely deplorable. Maybe they'd call us degenerates. I don't know if that word was a thing in the 18th century, but they would say these people need a king. And the fact that we're quoting the founding fathers to follow a constitution that they would not recommend for us is just completely beyond me. Eric Lafarre for $3 USA. The trad wife thing is neither traditional nor good for the wife. If nothing more, it's the pornification of tradition. An attempt to disaffect Zoomers to act out a feminist drag show of marriage. Yeah, I know that, but like, this is the thing I hate about the internet, right? You have women who are religious and who are devout, and they're complaining about, and they have large families, and they're aligned, and they're great writers. And you have them complaining about trad influencers. There's this property on the internet where the fake thing becomes the real thing. And this is especially true on TikTok. You have straight women pretending to be trans women to get more attention on TikTok. You have trans women setting fashion influences for women. The fake, it's like the tail wagging the dog. People are trying to, the real thing is the thing that gets treated as the counterfeit of the thing that it is faking. I can never get over how absolutely insane that is. I know lots of women who are Latin Mass. That's my cutoff for trad. If you go to a Latin Mass, you are trad. That's my cutoff. All right. Like if you have a homestead, you are trad. The men and women I know who work at homesteads and attend the traditional Latin Mass, those are trads. Those are real. That is not a TikTok phenomenon. But like everything, the internet has turned everything into a giant drag show. So I agree with you there. I hate that phenomenon. But why can't we just use labels for the real thing and then just call the fake thing fake trads? Can't we just call them fake trads as opposed to giving them a title? Seneca for $3 USA. I always get annoyed when slapped with the trad label as a Catholic. When did being Orthodox become extreme? Also, it's a good thing to see Fiddler's Green podcast once again. Salute from Missouri. Well, Missouri, nice state. I've driven through it once. I need to know more about the Plain State, but it's thank you very much and welcome from New Jersey. And great to see that sentiment because I share it entirely. Thank you very much, Seneca. Asteroidal Assassin for $5 USA. I understand one can't care about the entire world, but how exactly can the right claim to be against degeneracy, but support the expansion of the liberal establishment into other more conservative nations? Support the expansion. I understand that one can't care about the entire world. I mean, I care about it, but I mean, what do you want? Oh, okay, I'll put it this way, Asteroidal Assassin. What the State Department has accomplished over the last 80 years has been an absolute travesty for the world. I believe that sincerely. And I would like to undo it, but I am not going to be able to undo that in your country. All I can do is to abolish the State Department in my own country, which is very much for me a domestic issue. The State Department, and moreover the culture of the State Department, is the same culture that captured more or less the entire unelected government of America. This is a domestic issue for me. It is, I guess, also good foreign policy to prevent the United States from spreading degenerate and harmful culture to the rest of the world. And it's also good foreign policy to prevent the rest of the world from developing, extreme pathological technologies that could destroy the human race. But beyond that, I cannot be responsible for preserving culture or reinstituting traditional culture inside nations that have very, very little kinship with my own. I might be able to influence Germany because I have heritage there, or I might be able to talk about Canada because I'm literally have in-laws there and I may one day live there. But I cannot be responsible for countries that have no bonds to mine other than to make sure that my nation does not spread its own degeneracy to them. But that does not mean that I have to take sides in foreign conflicts that the State Department picks between two belligerents that have nothing to do with me. I don't have to endorse Ukraine or endorse Russia or decide whether the Ukrainians are more trad than the Russians. That is not seemly for me to do as an American with zero history in either of those two countries, depending on how you define it, I guess. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 again. I asked this out of pure curiosity. Did Miss Distributist actually go into the Corn Man's chat and make edgy jokes? Personally, I think it would be funny if true, but did she? Yeah, Miss Distributist did actually engage in the chat. I told her not to, but she did anyway. And I don't think she made edgy jokes. I think she just pushed back. And because the corn guy's girlfriend or whatever is so hysterical, she just flipped out and banned her. And then that was kind of, and then the narrative became that she's a Nazi, and they just said that so they would get me to quit, and then they could claim that I ran away. because I can't have people call the wife name. That doesn't work, right? These people are such trashy, low class people. This is like the equivalent of like trailer park people. I mean, I hate to say that because I feel like the white trash stereotype has been used to denigrate good and nice working class whites, like many of my friends now that were just so unjustly put down by people of my kind of caste ethnicity in the West. And I really hate that. But there is a genuinely low class behavior that whites need to be shamed out of. And I'm not talking about just working class behavior. I'm talking about a specific kind of behavior that really evolved in the late 20th century with the exporting of television to these communities. And, look, I mean, I recognize that in the Corn Man. Dusty for $15 USA says, thanks for the show. Thank you very much. Especially thank you for letting me get to the end of these things. Asteroidal Assassin for $3. Dave, I have a minor confession. I like Andrew Tate. The guy is funny, inspirational, and is morally righteous. I'm a Muslim, so I can't even be mad at the polygamy either. Well, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know Andrew Tate from anything out of the memes. The problem I have with Andrew Tate is his fans, which are really, really, really irritating. Fandoms get certain bad reputations, like the bronies of My Little Pony or the Homestuck fandom for back in the day. They get, and you don't want to be in charge of an irritating fandom. I like to think that the people who are, this isn't a fandom. We're organizing in real life. This is an actual fraternity of people. This is an actual community. You want to make sure that your online community has a good reputation. And, you don't want to be slaves to that. You don't want to be like, someone said something misogynist or something said something mean to me that hurt my feelings. Therefore, apologize constantly. Like, no, we can't do that kind of longhouse shit. But we have to be able to. We have to have a good reputation. We can't be like, every time I mention this person, people just dogpile me in the comments. Just don't do that. It's just not worth it. And if you want to leave like an opinion behind, but if you swarm people and ratio them, ratioing is just such a low class activity. It is not how you should use Twitter. Pac-Man Respecter for $15 USA. A member of my local Greek Orthodox is a homosexual relationship. A woman, surprisingly, she introduced her partner to me and a couple of other young guys in the church after service. I don't want this behavior to eat through my church like the others. What should I do? I think you as a parishioner need to ignore it and need to discuss it like it's a problem that she should deal with. Like, first of all, I think that the clergy in your church should maybe be being a little bit more forceful with this, correct? But you as a parishioner, you do not have standing to take action on this. And it's also not good to talk about your parishioners in the mode of gossip. So I would just acknowledge its existence to the point where it's already public knowledge and just say that this is something that we have to work on as a community to be more in calling with the church's doctrine on sexuality. Just treat it like it's a challenge. Like, what if this woman was morbidly obese? I'd say like, it's a challenge to live healthier lives, right? It's a challenge. And then just phrase it like everyone's working on it together. That's the best way to deal with these things. Everyone's working to get their sexualities more in line with the doctrine of the church. We should aspire to that. And keep on, never positively give it energy, and never disrespect an elder in your church community. That's just low cost behavior, and it's also against the doctrine of the church. Always treat them respectfully, always defer, never validate, and then treat the calling out of it like it's a fun project we can work on to get better. Any kind of more harsh stuff, that has to be something that begins with the church leader. And if you take that on yourself, I feel that you're kind of, other than just to restate in neutral or positive terms the position of the church to be called to chaste behavior, to do anything like to call it out politically, that I think you're kind of going over the head of your church leader. He needs to be the person who decides what tenor he wants to take with that. So thank you, Pac-Man Respector. I wish you the best of luck. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. This is old news, but what happened with the other YouTuber, Style is Substance? When did his response to your debate with Vosh? When did his response to your debate with Vosh? I mean, he did his response in 2020 during the COVID epidemic. So that's been those 4 years ago. It's been a really long time. You interacted with him in the comments, but nothing came of it. Yeah, because they stopped talking about discourse. First of all, they kind of went full troons, right? So that happened, which is kind of, and then they stopped talking about discourse. Oh, what are we going to talk about? Their channel is all about how to validate trans identities, which I think is fundamentally a misguided approach for society to take. Is there going to be a discourse over that? Probably not. Are we going to relitigate what good debate style is in a debate that happened between me and Vosh 5 years ago? I don't see the utility in that either. You know, I could debate the substance of the points, but as we all know now, Bosch is not about substance. He's about optics. And that's the whole thing. Augustine Bonhoeffer for $5 USA. I can't help but compare intellectual performance art to this C.S. Lewis quote. He doesn't think of doctrines as primarily true or false, just as academic, practical, outworn, contemporary, jargon, not an argument, or contemporary. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally. Yes, that is from the Screw Tape Letters. I recognize that quote. And very much, well, okay, there is a place for pure provocation, but people just need to know what they're buying, right? If they go to Walt Bismarck, what you're going to get is a fun essay, a cool idea, but probably not an idea that people are going to take very seriously, nor is the author necessarily going to own it in 6 more months. I would be amazed if Walt Bismarck stood behind his reparations idea is good in 2 years when it's no longer novel. Like if he asked, I'm going to answer the consequences for this great idea. That's not going to happen. So just understand what you're buying. And as long as it's properly labeled as just being edgy performance art that's like throwing stuff at the wall to see what happens, then I'm fine with that. Well, I'm fine with it existing. Obviously, I'm very not fine if it gets taken too seriously. But thank you. Great quote. Suitcase Nukes, Asteroidal Assassin for $3. Suitcase Nukes, as an engineer, what are your tips for making one? I'm totally not a violent black man. I just want to satisfy my curiosity. I'm not going to 1350 anyone, honest. Well, Asteroidal Assassin, in the 90s, it was Muslims with suitcase nukes, not black people. Outside of maybe Demolition Man, that's totally out of stereotype. But okay, I'm not going to get my stream banned, so thank you very much for that. I'm not going to give you advice on how to carry out horrible atrocities. Society Man for $5 USA. Speaking of C.S. Lewis, I just finished that Hideous Strength after hearing R.N. McIntyre advocate it for it so often. I appreciate that even back then, C.S. Lewis recognized how fundamentally anti-corporeal progressivism was. Yeah, it also has that interesting scene in it where the nice organization is trying to get the guy to come over to their side. And what they do is they expose him to all of this disassociative art that puts things in a perverse framework. so that he'll disassociate from all of his moral norms and become amenable to their new way of saying things. That is great. It's a great book. It's by far the best of the trilogy, which is so weird that the third book is like the one you want to read, and you can almost skip over the first two, which are kind of a little bit light on substance, but very much one of the strongest fiction books that C.S. Lewis ever wrote. Anyway, going on, Michael Letourneau for $3 USA. Thomas Shetty, head of the New Atheists for Liberty, claimed the reason for New Atheism failed was because it didn't go hard enough. What do you think killed New Atheism? Even New Atheists will say this. What killed New Atheism was wokeness, and it's that you can literally see it happen with the Amazing Atheist and all the other. Gamergate killed New Atheism because what happened is in wokeness, atheism actually had to answer a moral proposition. And when it had to answer a moral proposition or an ideological proposition, it realized that atheism could really answer no questions. It was useless. And immediately, once that became the frame, it immediately became apparent that atheism was more or less the least interesting thing about any atheist. And essentially that they were arguing and identifying with what amounted to nothing, or a view from nowhere, as I say. So that's what killed New Atheism. I need to hurry up because my voice is running out and it's 1 o'clock. Michael Letourneau for $5 again. A question I must ask. Is religion, regardless of truth, too valuable to get rid of? Society seems to be having a Nietzschean dilemma about whether we should keep the devil we know or try to abolish it in the hopes of getting something better. Well, look, man, I mean, you can't manufacture a religion. It doesn't work. You could, I mean, look, let's say you can build a religion in a sense. So let's say, for instance, that America becomes a dictatorship and it's really, really strong. Like, I don't know, maybe AI works out and it gets really, really strong. That turbo society could manufacture a religion by controlling media and combining elements of previous religions together. And then eventually it would become a religion. But it's going to suffer from the same problems as all the other religions. First of all, people actually have to believe it. So, and the second thing is that once you have your perverse ideology mixed in with religion and it doesn't evolve organically, then all of a sudden, your religion's going to start going nuts because there's going to be all of these second order consequences from the original doctrines. Because religion is an organic thing. Even if you grow it intentionally, artificially, like a test tube baby, it still evolves in an organic, unpredictable way. So this idea that you can engineer religion to get something better is a ridiculous quest. Better by what standard? Oh, right, your religious standards. By definition, whatever you judge the religion that you've made to be right or wrong by, that standard is already your religion, and you by definition have not chosen it. This was the dilemma that C.S. Lewis brought up in The Abolition of Man. And just appealing to will is like an infinite regress problem. It just keeps on going back and back and back. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's much of a debate here. I mean, you could argue, okay, Christianity. I don't like Christianity. Fine. What's your alternative? Well, all of the alternatives to Christianity that we've examined have been basically LARPs. They've been LARPs, or they've been fake, or they've been rehashes of the fake God of progress that just self-referentially loop what will happen into the future and are essentially substanceless in addition to not being believed by the people who create them. That is not an alternative. So in order for there to be a genuine religious debate, there needs to be two sides, and there currently are not. $25 USA from Andre says, thank you for all you do. Give my best, Mr. Supertist. Your wisdom is a guiding light. Well, thank you very much, Andre. I appreciate that it's very short, so I can try to get to the end of this. Michael Latornu for $3 USA. Colin Wright says the religious right has to accept change from atheists like him. Yeah, why the fuck would we do that? Because of all the wonderful advice new atheists have given us over the last 20 years. All of their predictions have been shit. James Lindsay and Thomas Sheedy, if they want to win in the election. What do you say to such a condescending statement? I mean, your ideas are dog shit. That's what I have to say. I mean, you're selling me, you're selling me like a mortgage on a house, and the house is fucking on fire. Atheism created the conditions for wokeness, new atheism in particular, among the millennial generation. It was not the main proximate origin, which was our educational system, but it was one of the things that paved the way. And in the meantime, the atheist reaction to wokeness has been to LARP about going back to the 1990s and to come up with various forms of liberalism that would have been anathema to the people who had invented the doctrine of liberalism in the 18th century. Now, when I say atheists do that, I mean most atheists. There are, of course, atheists, really agnostics, if we're talking about Sargon. Like, Sargon is, I think, an agnostic, and he gets what's going on more or less. But the track record for these people like James Lindsay and the new atheist crowd is shit. It's absolute dog shit. And it absolutely has zero purchase. Like, what is the new atheist sexual ethic? Go. Is it consent-based sexuality? Because I know where consent-based sexuality leads us, and it's into shit. It's into the same shit that we've been dealing with from Me Too, from Yes All Women, from feminism 3.0 or whatever, the millennial feminism 1.0. It leads nowhere. Everyone can see this. They've got no currency right now. They have no leverage. What they have right now is they have a bunch of confused boomers who want to go back to the 90s, period. Let's see. Okay. I am running out of energy. Jay Ford for $3. Shame I missed your speech. I don't think it's likely I'm going to hear it. Well, yeah, it will be, because it will get published and then you just DM me. For instance, if you want to see my speech from 2022, last year's, you just have to DM me on Twitter, and then I will DM you a link to the privated video. I always let people message me, and please basket weave. I guess if you went to the event, you're doing basket weaving already. But I always mail the private links to people who ask for the video on request. So you will be able to hear it on video. And I hope I was holding the microphone properly, because I was walking around a lot when giving it. Thank you very much, though, Jay Ford, and good meeting you two at the event. Although the thing and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I mean, faces are hard for me because I've got so many people in my head now that I know, I obviously know you were there. I talked to you, but the face is already kind of blurry because there's so many people, and I was never good at that. Jay Ford for $3. So did you learn your lesson from the Corn Man? Well, I mean, I learned my lesson that I should have probably quit earlier. Right, I should have just said I have a time limit. Jay Ford for $50 USA. Showing support for the stream, please get $50 for the stream. Okay, showing support for the stream, please get a moderator from the Crucible next time. I guess he's a YouTuber. Yeah, for that Corn guy, I would debate him again with a moderator. I would absolutely destroy him with a moderator. But thank you. $50 from Blackjack. Oh, hey man. Well, it's a very generous super chat. Thank you so much. Sorry I missed the stream again. Looking forward to returning from the edge of the GAA and getting more involved. Well, congratulations. You're coming back from the edge. I assume you might be, I don't want to speculate, but you might be on a professional obligation overseas. But always good to see Blackjack. I remember meeting you one time over dinner way back in the early days of the channel and in the project. Black Pilled Cat for $15 USA. Great show. Thankful for it. You're probably the smartest guy within these thing of ours. I don't know about that, man. That conference was full of very, very smart people. I don't want to talk too much about the conference because you can just tune in tomorrow to hear me and the Traditionalist talk about it. So I don't want to double dip the Oreo too much, but thank you very much for the flattering remark. I'm glad you think so. Yo for $5 USA. Do you find it hard writing Bava Brit functions all day and still have the mental energy to read, write, and talk about ballistics in your spare time? Politics in your spare time? Yeah, JavaScript. I don't write JavaScript. I write Python. I don't have to write JavaScript when I'm very, very unlucky and dealing with legacy code. Yeah, this is very, very hard because I get writing time at around 10 p.m. after I'm done with everything. And when I get my writing time at 10 p.m., I'm beat. I can't focus. It's very, very difficult. But thank you. Owen Zaleski for $5 USA. Hello, Dave. I'm curious about the intersection with this stream and art. Where does it fall into normality? Trad West art or avant-garde, or is it enough to just make art? Also, could you keep my family in your prayers? Thank you for the stream. And GB. Great Britain. I forget what... okay, I'm not going to speculate. Basque weaving. Well, whatever. No thanks. You can tell I'm tired because I trailed off. No thanks for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. And prayers for your family. We'll say a psalm after I finish these super chats. Hi, Dave. Do you think there may be space for a right-wing exploration into psychedelics? First-person contact with a supernatural experience dissolves materialist philosophies. DMT has made even my staunchest atheist friends reconsider. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not against psychedelics. I don't think they're in keeping with the Catholic Church, but look, this is it's really dangerous from a spiritual point of view. Like, for instance, Ouija boards, right? Like, anytime, Ouija boards probably could disabuse a materialist of materialism, but they're also incredibly dangerous, spiritually speaking. Now, look, I used to be a skeptic, and I am still somebody who has an incredible skepticism towards ordinary miraculous behavior. I dislike relics. Anytime I hear a miracle happening, I'm like, oh yeah, it's probably not true. That's just my background. But experience and stories and personal accounts have taught me over the course of my delving into religion and believing in it to be very, very, very careful about just going I'm having a spiritual experience. Here, come get me, spirits of whatever form you want. That's just not a good thing to do. Reaching out to spirits generally is something that I think you need to have some spiritual preparation for in order for it to be safe. So my instinct is I actually kind of do think psychedelics might be explored as a spiritual avenue, for people who are monks or really, spiritually fortified. Because I believe that for the vulnerable, psychedelics is an avenue for malevolent entities in the same way that a Ouija board might be. And the problem is that I also feel that probably Ouija boards probably wouldn't be dangerous if they were used by priests, but they're not. They're used by the most spiritually influential people imaginable. So it's it's like drunk driving or TikTok, or the object is attractive to the exact demographic you don't want to use it, right? So that's my reservation about psychedelics, is that I think that it's dangerous, even though in theory I think your point is accurate. No thanks for $3 USA. I acknowledge that it does not move people towards Christianity. However, it does unseat them from materialism with some regularity. Oh, this is psychedelics. Is this not a positive repositioning? Love you, Dave. Well, I mean, like I said before, yeah, but I mean, I mean, I could get people to convert to religion by giving them a near-death experience in a car crash, but and so they're in like an ultimate way, maybe that's better, right? But there are some things that are just like what I call imponderables. Like the risk seems to outweigh the reward. You are in theory correct that it is possible, but I don't see how it can be done in a safe way unless somebody of more spiritual aptitude than me could comment on that. Today, that's the end of the super chats, so I will now read the Psalm of the night, and we will read Psalm 33 with special intention for the family members of the chat and the community, and my own family members, in particular my father. Psalm 33. Sing joyfully to the Lord, you're righteous. It is fitting for the upright to praise him. Praise the Lord with the harp. Make the music to him on the 10-stringed lyre. Sing to him a new song. Play skillfully and shout for joy. For the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in what he does. The Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry hosts by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of sea into jars. He puts the deep into the storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the people. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chooses for his inheritance. From heaven the Lord looks down and seeks all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches all who live on earth. He who forms the heart of all, who considers everything they do. No king is saved by the size of his army. No warrior escapes by his great strength. A horse is a vain hope of deliverance. Despite all its greatest strength, it cannot save. But the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, and on those his hope is his unfailing love, to deliver from them death and keep them alive in famine. We wait in the hope of the Lord. He is our help, our shield, and in him our hearts shall rejoice, for we trust his holy name. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, ever as we put our hope in you. All right, guys, thank you so much. That was Fiddler's Green Podcast 49. I hope to see you in the not so distant future, and I will see you otherwise on Substack and on YouTube. Have a good evening.